My name is Rebecca. I am 33 years old. I stood on the pristine, manicured lawn of my newly purchased $2.5 million estate, watching a team of caterers methodically arrange $25,000 worth of gourmet food for a party I never actually wanted to host in the first place. What was originally planned as my long-awaited housewarming celebration had been quietly, systematically hijacked to honor my younger sister instead. Then my phone vibrated with an incoming text from an unknown number. Attached was a 3-minute video of my own family, mocking me behind my back and openly plotting to steal the very house I was standing in. I smiled slowly, canceled the caterers, changed every smart lock on the property, and drove away to treat myself to a long, luxurious massage. When they arrived to find an empty, bolted-shut house baking under the sweltering midday heat, I forwarded them the video. But before I continue this story, let me give you the full picture. It is 10 o'clock in the morning. The sun is already hammering down on the immaculate, professionally landscaped grounds of my new property. I am pacing the wide stone patio, my phone pressed firmly to my ear, using one perfectly manicured finger to direct the catering manager toward the far end of the lawn. I calmly but firmly instruct him to relocate the champagne tower out of direct sunlight before the bottles warm. I remind the florist that the imported white hydrangeas must be lightly misted with cool water before noon, or they will wilt in the heat and ruin the entire aesthetic. As the founder and CEO of an elite crisis management and public relations firm, I do not do things halfway. When a high-profile client hires me to contain a corporate scandal, I contain it. Permanently, surgically, and without a trace. When I host an event, it is absolutely flawless, from the first centerpiece to the final signature cocktail. This house is my ultimate sanctuary. I paid $2.5 million for it entirely in cash. No mortgage, no co-signers, just the tangible, undeniable result of a decade of relentless, brutal work spent cleaning up catastrophic messes for the most powerful people in the country. Today was supposed to be my victory lap. A sophisticated, intimate housewarming to celebrate the fact that I had built a highly lucrative empire from absolutely nothing. No family money, no safety net, no inheritance to fall back on. But my parents, Richard and Susan, had entirely different plans for my day. 2 weeks ago, my mother called me in manufactured tears, begging me to share the spotlight with someone more deserving of the moment. My younger sister, Madison, was finally pregnant. According to my parents, Madison and her husband, Trey, desperately needed this emotional morale boost to lift their spirits. They framed it as a small favor. It was not. Trey is a flashy, smooth-talking startup founder who always wears custom-tailored suits and talks a massive game about his rapidly expanding tech company. From the very first time I met him at a family dinner 3 years ago, I saw straight through his polished, arrogant facade. The confidence was rehearsed. The success was borrowed. The smile was a performance. My parents, however, were completely enchanted by him. They insisted that my beautiful new backyard, with its resort-style pool, stone fountain, and rolling manicured lawn, was the perfect wealthy backdrop for their grand pregnancy announcement party. I was annoyed. Actually, I was quietly, deeply furious. But as a professional crisis manager, I am extensively trained to calculate the path of least resistance before choosing my battles. Arguing with my mother about her golden child, Madison, always ended in a dramatic, emotionally exhausting blowout that consumed entire weekends and left me feeling hollowed out. I just wanted a peaceful weekend settling into my new home. So I swallowed my pride, wrote the $25,000 check for the luxury catering out of my own personal account, and allowed my housewarming to be completely and utterly hijacked. I check my gold watch. It is exactly 10:15 in the morning. The guests, 50 of Trey's supposed VIP tech investors, and a small handful of our relatives, are expected to arrive precisely at 1 o'clock. The caterers are working in organized overdrive, setting up the elaborate carving stations for the Wagyu beef. The massive custom ice sculptures are glistening brilliantly near the pool, catching the morning light. I take a long, slow breath, trying to consciously force myself into the role of the quiet, supportive older sister. I walk toward the massive kitchen island to grab a bottle of sparkling water when my phone suddenly vibrates sharply on the cool marble counter. I pick it up. It is an iMessage from an unknown number. There is no text greeting, no introduction, just a video file attached. It is exactly 3 minutes long. My pulse slows down and shifts into a familiar, focused rhythm. In my high-stakes professional world, anonymous messages usually mean a wealthy client is about to appear on the front page of the tabloids for a catastrophic personal mistake. My brain instantly and automatically pivots into aggressive damage control mode. I tap the glass screen and press play. The video is shaky at first, filmed from a hidden, awkward angle in what clearly appears to be Trey and Madison's living room. The lighting is dim and slightly yellow, but the voices carrying through my phone speaker are completely, unmistakably clear. It is Trey, Madison, my parents, all 4 of them, sitting around a low coffee table clinking expensive wine glasses, laughing like they do not have a single care in the world. My stomach tightens into a cold, solid knot. I turn the volume all the way up and stand completely, perfectly still in my empty kitchen, listening to the people who share my blood plot, my absolute financial ruin, with the casual ease of people planning a vacation. The camera angle is slightly obscured, positioned exactly like a smartphone propped up discreetly behind a tall stack of books on a shelf. I can clearly make out all 4 of them lounging in Trey and Madison's cramped apartment living room. My mother, Susan, is holding a large glass of deep red wine, her face flushed with alcohol and private amusement. My father, Richard, is leaning back comfortably in his worn-out recliner, wearing the particular expression of a man who is enormously, insufferably pleased with himself. Trey is standing near the kitchen counter in one of his signature tailored vests, gesturing grandly with both hands like he is delivering a keynote speech at a major conference. Madison is curled up on the sofa, her hands resting lightly on her slightly swollen belly. They are celebrating. But they are not celebrating the new baby. They are celebrating my destruction. Trey takes a slow, theatrical sip of his bourbon and smiles across the room at my sister. He tells her that tomorrow is going to be the single biggest day of their entire lives. Madison laughs, that high-pitched grating sound I have endured and quietly despised my entire life. She tosses her blonde hair over one shoulder and looks directly at our parents sitting across from her. She says she still cannot believe Rebecca is actually paying $25,000 for the catering. She calls me desperate for family approval, as if buying into their scheme out of sheer exhaustion somehow confirms a character flaw I am supposed to be ashamed of. Susan chuckles loudly, shaking her head, and replies that it is the very least I can do considering how difficult and demanding I am to be around. Then Madison delivers the single line that makes the blood freeze completely and entirely in my veins. She smirks and says, "Let her pay for it. What else is she going to spend her money on anyway? She is just a barren, unlovable ATM. It is not like she will ever have a real family of her own." I do not flinch. I do not cry. I do not look away from the screen. In my line of work, uncontrolled emotion is a massive, career-ending liability. I keep my eyes locked on the video and keep watching with the cold, focused attention of a surgeon. Trey claps his hands together sharply, drawing everyone's attention back to himself like a conductor calling an orchestra to order. He tells them to stay focused on the real prize. He outlines his plan with the terrifying, rehearsed confidence of a man who has convinced himself he is untouchable. He explains that his tech startup has completely burned through its operating capital, and that his private investors are beginning to ask very aggressive, pointed questions he cannot currently answer. So during the peak of the party tomorrow afternoon, right at the moment when all 50 of his wealthy VIP guests are eating my expensive food and drinking my champagne under the warm summer sun, he is going to make a grand, sweeping announcement. He is going to stand on my stone patio, raise a crystal flute high above his head, and boldly declare to the assembled crowd that his company has just officially acquired my $2.5 million estate to serve as its prestigious new corporate headquarters. I watch him strut around the small apartment, laying out his fantasy with the energy of a man who genuinely believes his own lies. He tells Madison that once his investors lay eyes on the sheer luxury and commanding presence of my estate, they will blindly, enthusiastically trust his tech company and open their checkbooks without hesitation. He says perception is reality in the business world, and he intends to borrow mine. My mother nods along, completely enchanted by Trey's magnetic but utterly hollow charm. She actually praises him for being so resourceful and creative. She says it is about time that my success started benefiting the people who actually matter in this family. Hearing my own mother openly validate a conspiracy to steal my home feels like a physical blow to the center of my chest, but I force myself to breathe slowly and evenly. I analyze their body language, the casual cruelty woven into their voices, the comfortable ease with which they discuss destroying me over expensive wine. They are not acting out of financial desperation. They are acting out of pure, bottomless entitlement. They genuinely and completely believe that I exist on this earth solely to fund their delusions of grandeur, that my decade of sacrifice, discipline, and relentless work is simply a resource available to them on demand. Then my mother asks the critical question. She asks Trey what happens when I actually hear him announce the fake acquisition from my own patio. She worries I might snap in front of everyone and derail the entire pregnancy announcement in the process. Trey laughs loudly, as if the concern is almost too obvious to warrant a response. He reminds my mother that I am a crisis public relations manager, that my entire professional identity is built on maintaining flawless, unimpeachable public images at all costs. He states with absolute confidence that I will never dare make a scene, publicly challenge him, or cause a spectacle in front of 50 elite investors. He knows precisely how deeply I detest public humiliation. He plans to weaponize my own professionalism against me, to force me to stand there smiling and nodding politely while he steals my property in broad daylight, surrounded by witnesses. He calls it the perfect checkmate. It is a vicious, methodically calculated trap, but it still lacks the legal teeth to actually transfer property ownership. Trey cannot simply speak an acquisition into existence without hard collateral and proper documentation. Even I know it is technically toothless on its own. That is when my father, the man who once walked me to my very first day of school, holding my small hand in his, delivers the final lethal blow that changes everything. Richard leans forward slowly in his recliner, the ice clinking softly in his glass. He waves off my mother's lingering concerns with a lazy, dismissive flick of his wrist. He looks directly at Trey with a proud, conspiratorial grin spreading wide across his face. He says, "Do not worry about Rebecca. I already forged her signature as a guarantor on the loan draft. I sent the documents to the private lenders yesterday afternoon. By the time she figures it out, the money will already be in your account. She will not make a scene in front of the VIPs today, and by Monday morning she will be legally bound to your debt." The video ends. The screen goes black and silent. I stand completely still in the quiet of my kitchen, the marble floor suddenly feeling like solid ice beneath my feet. My own father, the man who taught me how to ride a bicycle on a warm Saturday morning. The man whose approval I had subconsciously and exhaustingly chased for the better part of my entire life. He just casually, cheerfully admitted to committing felony wire fraud in order to bail out my arrogant, fraudulent brother-in-law's failing crypto scheme. He forged my signature on a corporate guarantor draft. He leveraged my hard-earned financial identity, my credit, my name, my reputation, as collateral for Trey's mounting debts, all while comfortably assuming I would be far too polite, too professional, too desperate for their love to fight back. Any other woman might have dropped to the floor and wept. Any other daughter might have frantically dialed her mother, screaming and demanding an explanation through uncontrollable tears. But I do not cry. I do not shake. I do not reach out for answers, because I already have every single one I need. Instead, a profound ice-cold clarity washes completely over me, the kind that only comes when the last illusion finally burns away and you can finally see exactly what something is. The sister I spent decades trying to tolerate is a parasite. The parents I spent decades trying to please are her willing accomplices. I flip a mental switch, deliberate, final, and permanent. The dutiful daughter is dead. The crisis manager is wide awake, and I am clocking in. I tuck my phone into my pocket and walk with measured, purposeful calm straight out through the sliding glass doors into the backyard. The summer heat is already climbing aggressively, baking the wide stone patio in heavy waves. The catering team is working in full, organized overdrive. The head chef is delicately slicing paper-thin ribbons of Wagyu beef with surgical precision, while the waitstaff carefully arranges hundreds of gleaming crystal champagne flutes into a towering, breathtaking pyramid. It is, by any objective measure, a spectacular display of wealth and hospitality. I walk directly and without hesitation to the catering manager, a stressed-looking man clutching a clipboard, and tap him firmly on the shoulder. I tell him the party is officially and immediately canceled. He stares at me in complete bewilderment, pointing out that all of the food has already been fully prepared and is entirely non-refundable at this stage. I do not blink. I open my banking application, locate his business account, and wire $5,000 directly into it while he watches. I tell him the extra $5,000 is for his complete discretion and his speed. I instruct him to pack up every single ounce of food on these grounds, every tray of Wagyu, every lobster tail, every bottle of imported champagne, every garnish, load it all immediately into his refrigerated trucks, and drive it directly to the downtown women and children's shelter. I want every resident there eating like absolute royalty today. He looks at the transfer confirmation appearing on his screen, nods once, briskly, and turns to bark sharp, efficient orders at his staff. Within 45 minutes, the entire catering operation has vanished as though it was never there. The expansive lawn is completely, eerily empty. The silence returns, broken only by the low, steady hum of cicadas hidden deep in the heavy summer air. Now it is time to secure the perimeter. I pull up the Central Command application on my tablet. My house is a fully integrated smart home, fortified with state-of-the-art layered security architecture. With a series of swift, precise taps, I delete every single stored guest passcode from the system. I specifically locate the emergency backup code I gave my father access to last month and permanently erase it from the registry. I then change the master digital lock combination to a long, randomly generated alphanumeric string that no one alive could guess. But locking the doors is not enough. Not for what they tried to do. I want them to feel the full, unrelenting weight of their own entitlement burning under the midday sun, with nowhere to hide and nothing to drink. I walk to the utility panel housed in the garage. I manually close the main outdoor water supply valves one by one. The automated sprinkler system deactivates. The elegant decorative fountains flanking the pool go still and drain into absolute silence. They will not be able to extract so much as a single drop of water from even the garden hose. Next, I open the electrical breaker box and methodically locate the switches corresponding to the patio fans, the outdoor refrigeration units, and the expansive shaded pergola lighting. I pull every one of them to the off position. The gentle, cooling artificial breeze from the overhead fans dies instantly. Every outdoor outlet goes completely dark and dead. I have transformed my luxury estate into an impenetrable, sweltering fortress. I walk upstairs to my master suite. I pull my signature orange Hermes weekender bag from the closet and methodically pack my designer swimsuit, a silk cover-up, and my favorite oversized tortoiseshell sunglasses. I pause to check my reflection in the full-length mirror, adjusting one small strand of hair back into place. I look calm. I look wealthy. I look entirely, serenely unreachable. I walk out the front door, waiting until I hear the satisfying, heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding automatically into place behind me. I settle into the cool leather seat of my car, start the engine, and merge smoothly onto the highway heading north. I drive 2 hours to an exclusive, members-only spa resort hidden discreetly in the mountains, a place I have been a member of for 4 years and have visited exactly twice, both times to recover from other people's catastrophes. I hand my keys to the valet, walk unhurried through the lobby, and settle into the private cabana I reserved on my drive up. I lower myself onto the plush lounge chair, pull out my phone, toggle it to Do Not Disturb, and set it face down on the side table like a closed case file. A waiter approaches silently. I order a double mimosa. I lean back, close my eyes, and listen to the mountain breeze move through the trees, knowing with complete, unshakable certainty that my family is driving directly into the most perfectly executed trap of my professional career. It is exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The temperature has surged to an oppressive 95 degrees. I am reclining comfortably on a plush lounge chair beneath the deep, generous shade of my private mountain cabana. A cool, fragrant breeze drifts past me as I take a slow sip of my mimosa. I pick up my tablet and open the smart home security application with one hand. The live high-definition feed from my front porch camera appears instantly on the crisp screen. The show is beginning right on schedule. A procession of luxury vehicles begins pulling one by one into my long, curved driveway. First is Trey's leased Porsche Cayenne, gleaming in the punishing afternoon sun. Behind it, my parents' black SUV. And behind them, a steady, impressive stream of sleek, dark cars carrying the 50 VIP tech investors Trey had personally invited to witness his grand, elaborate delusion unfold in real time. The doors open. The players step out onto the blistering hot asphalt. Madison emerges first. She is wearing a heavy, floor-length designer maternity gown constructed from thick, lustrous silk, the kind of garment that photographs magnificently under soft studio lighting in a climate-controlled ballroom. Out here, under 95 degrees of unfiltered afternoon sun with no shade, no breeze, and no water in sight, it is a suffocating, beautiful trap of her own making. Trey steps out next, looking supremely smug in his dark, heavy wool suit. He adjusts his silk tie with practiced ease, entirely oblivious to the catastrophe that is already waiting for him just around the corner. My parents follow behind, smiling broadly and playing the role of gracious, accomplished in-laws. They shake hands with the arriving investors, gesture proudly toward the house as though they have some personal stake in the property, and guide everyone with cheerful confidence toward the backyard. Trey leads the assembled group up the wide stone pathway. I switch to the rear patio camera and watch as they round the corner of the house and step into the backyard. The smug, proprietary smile on Trey's face disappears in an instant, replaced by a look of sheer, raw, unadulterated shock that I wish I could frame and hang on a wall. The sprawling lawn is completely, utterly, devastatingly empty. No massive white catering tents, no Wagyu beef carving station, no towering crystal champagne pyramid catching the afternoon light. The decorative pool fountains are dead and motionless. The overhead patio fans hang completely still. The entire outdoor entertainment space, which was carefully designed to be the breathtaking, luxurious backdrop for Trey's fraudulent corporate acquisition announcement, looks like an abandoned property baking under a merciless, unforgiving sun. I zoom into the camera feed. The confusion ripples visibly through the assembled crowd of elite investors like a wave through water. These are wealthy, powerful, deeply impatient people who arrived expecting to be pampered and impressed. Instead, they are standing on scorching stone pavers in the center of a brutal 95-degree heat wave with zero shade, zero water, and zero explanation. Sweat begins to bead on their foreheads. Several of them start quietly checking their expensive watches and exchanging skeptical whispers, their expressions shifting steadily from confusion to irritation. Trey completely loses what remains of his composure. He rushes to the back sliding glass doors and yanks hard on the handle. It does not move. He presses his face against the tinted glass, desperately trying to peer into my dark, empty kitchen, as if the answers to his unraveling life might be visible inside. He runs to the digital keypad mounted on the exterior wall and punches in the backup code my father had provided. A flat red light flashes, followed by a sharp, decisive error, beep. He tries again, his thick fingers trembling and stumbling over the keypad. Error, beep. He looks back at the crowd of sweating investors, his eyes wide and bright with escalating panic. Dark sweat stains are already forming beneath the arms of his heavy wool suit. Madison waddles up to the door, her face flushed scarlet from the suffocating heat generated by several layers of thick silk. She jiggles the handle with increasing aggression, whining loudly and without restraint. My father marches over, jaw set with fury, and physically attempts to force the lock himself through the sheer power of his outrage. The heavy deadbolt does not care about his feelings. The investors watch this progressively pathetic display unfold. The whispered conversations grow louder and less discreet. The polished, irresistible image of a supremely successful tech CEO on the verge of acquiring a multi-million-dollar estate is evaporating in real time, replaced, moment by moment, by the far less compelling reality of a frantic man locked out of a house he quite obviously does not own. My phone vibrates on the side table. It is Trey calling. I let it ring through to silence. He calls again immediately. I decline it. My screen floods with 5 rapid-fire text messages from my mother, demanding to know where the caterers have gone and why every single door is locked. The barely contained panic pulsing through her words is almost tangible even through a phone screen. They are trapped outside in the full, brutal sun with 50 angry millionaires behind them and zero coherent explanations to offer. I take a long, slow, deliberate sip of my cold mimosa. I open the family group chat. I do not compose a long, emotional paragraph laying out my grievances. I do not demand an apology or explain myself. I simply and quietly attach the 3-minute video file I received that morning. I wait exactly 10 seconds to ensure the file has fully delivered to every phone in the group. Then I add a single, clean, devastating line of text. Party canceled. Locks changed. Have fun explaining this to your investors. I press send. I lock my phone screen and set it face down on the table. I lean back against the deep cushions of the lounge chair, close my eyes, and take another slow sip of my drink, feeling absolutely nothing but the purest, most complete, most deeply earned satisfaction I have ever experienced in my life. The silence lasts exactly 30 seconds. Then my phone begins to vibrate so continuously and violently that it practically dances across the smooth glass of the cabana table. I pick it up, watching the lock screen detonate with an avalanche of incoming notifications. The family group chat is in full, spectacular collapse. I unlock the device and scroll slowly, deliberately through the chaos, reading each message carefully while the cool mountain breeze moves across my skin. My mother, Susan, opens the assault. She is typing entirely in capital letters, firing messages back to back with the frantic, unfocused energy of someone who has never once been called to account for anything. She demands I drive back to the house immediately. She insists that I am catastrophically overreacting to what she now describes as a stupid, drunken joke. She claims Madison is severely overheating, that the baby is in acute physical danger, and that by refusing to open the door, I am exposing myself as a completely heartless, monstrous human being. It is fascinating, almost clinically so, to watch her attempt to rewrite reality in real time. A silly joke. That is the precise phrase she selects to describe a meticulously planned, multi-million-dollar scheme to steal my estate and forge my legal signature on fraudulent loan documents. Before I have even fully processed my mother's profound delusion, Madison chimes into the chat. She sends a dramatically staged selfie taken from a low angle designed to emphasize distress. In the photograph, thick tears stream down her face, her mascara smudged in dark streaks beneath her eyes, her expression wide and desperate and carefully calibrated for maximum impact. She follows the photo with a rapid barrage of text. She says her chest is unbearably tight. She says she cannot breathe in the thick, dense afternoon air. She says she feels dizzy and faint. She accuses me of deliberately and callously endangering the health of my unborn niece or nephew simply to indulge my own petty pride. It is classic Madison. This is the precise, well-worn playbook she has been running since childhood. Whenever she is caught doing something genuinely terrible, she instantly and reflexively weaponizes her own fragility, performing vulnerability so automatic and fluid, it barely registers as a performance anymore. Growing up, this tactic worked on our parents every single time without fail. If she destroyed my belongings or deliberately sabotaged something I had worked hard on, she would manufacture tears and force herself into visible hyperventilation until my parents turned their focus onto punishing me for upsetting her. They always, without exception, enabled her victimhood. They consistently forced me to apologize for her crimes, but I am no longer a helpless teenager trapped inside their suffocating inverted household. I am a professional crisis manager who dismantles false narratives and exposes constructed lies for a living. Emotional manipulation is my native language, and I speak it fluently enough to recognize every syllable. I do not engage with her performance. Instead, I switch applications and open the smart home security feed on my phone. I toggle to the main front porch camera. The lenses on my security system are commercial grade, offering resolution precise enough to read a license plate from 50 feet away in direct sunlight. I zoom in directly on Madison. Exactly as expected, she is not crying. She is not clutching her chest or gasping for oxygen. She is standing in comfortable, deliberate stillness in the deepest available shade of the portico entrance. She is holding a glossy business magazine, apparently retrieved from one of the investors' parked luxury vehicles, and using it to aggressively fan her flushed face. With her other free hand, she is holding a small designer compact mirror. I watch her carefully unscrew a tube of expensive peach lip gloss and calmly, methodically reapply it with practiced precision. She looks genuinely hot and thoroughly annoyed. She is entirely, perfectly fine. I take a crisp, high-definition screenshot of the live camera frame. I switch back to the group chat and upload the photo directly beneath her tearful, dramatic selfie without a word of preamble. Then I add a single, surgically precise sentence. The lip gloss looks great, but the lighting on my porch is genuinely terrible for acting. The chat goes instantly, completely, profoundly silent. I can vividly imagine the four of them standing there on my sun-scorched driveway, staring down at their glowing phone screens in absolute paralytic disbelief. The sudden, visceral realization that I am actively watching their every move, that I have been watching, that I am exposing their lies in clean, irrefutable real-time must be an almost physically crushing humiliation. Through the camera feed, I watch Madison look down at her phone, go visibly pale, and hastily shove the lip gloss back into the depths of her designer purse. Trey is pacing in tightening circles, pulling at the collar of his wool suit jacket, surrounded on all sides by VIP investors who are now openly, vocally complaining and directing pointed, impatient questions directly at him. For 2 full, glorious minutes, not a single person in the group chat types a single word. They have no defense remaining. The social pressure pressing in from 50 wealthy, increasingly irritated witnesses standing just behind them is compounding with every passing second. Then a new text bubble appears at the bottom of my screen. It is from my father, Richard. He has abandoned all pretense of apology or manipulation. He has discarded the guilt trips and the fake appeals to family loyalty. What remains is pure, cornered, desperate aggression. His message appears on my screen dripping with venom and the shredded authority of a man who has just realized he has no power left. You ungrateful brat, I am the co-signer on this house. I have legal rights to this property and I am calling the police right now. My father's text threat hangs in the digital air between us. Calling the police. The ultimate escalation and exactly the cornered, chaotic move I had already anticipated and prepared for the moment I watched that video. I do not reply to his message. I simply keep my eyes steady on the high-definition security feed playing on my screen. The situation on my driveway is deteriorating rapidly from a private family implosion into a very public, very visible spectacle. Trey realizes in real time that he is losing his audience, and that losing his audience today means losing everything. The 50 elite tech investors he personally recruited and flew in from across the country are no longer whispering discreetly among themselves. They are openly, loudly expressing displeasure about the 95-degree heat, the complete absence of food, water, or shade, and the spectacular lack of any credible explanation from the man who invited them here. Trey knows his multi-million-dollar illusion is not simply fading, it is disintegrating in front of the exact people whose faith he needed most. He needs to assert dominance. He needs to recapture the narrative. He needs to do it immediately or watch everything collapse entirely. I watch as he yanks his smartphone from his suit pocket, hands visibly trembling against the dark screen. He dials 911 and deliberately, theatrically presses the speakerphone button, holding the device high above his head so every investor within earshot can hear both sides of the call, like a man making a public performance of his own desperation. The emergency dispatcher answers and asks for the location and the nature of the emergency. Trey clears his throat, straightens his spine, and consciously deepens his voice to project a tone of offended, wronged authority. He tells the dispatcher that he is the chief executive officer of a major technology startup. He claims with breathtaking boldness that a hostile, disgruntled former tenant has unlawfully seized control of his newly acquired corporate headquarters and changed the locks to prevent legitimate access. He uses my full name. He tells the operator that Rebecca has illegally barricaded herself, or arranged for the property to be barricaded, and is effectively holding his corporate real estate hostage while he attempts to conduct executive business with partners who have traveled specifically to attend this event. He demands immediate police response. It is a spectacular, audacious, magnificent lie, delivered with the practiced confidence of someone who has spent years constructing elaborate fictions and talking people into believing them. But the audience he is performing for is not buying a single word of it. These investors are seasoned, calculating, deeply experienced sharks. They built their respective fortunes by developing finely tuned instincts for spotting fraudulent founders bleeding in deep water. And right now, Trey is hemorrhaging in front of them. They look at this sweating, panicking man locked out of a residential property, standing next to his heavily pregnant wife, his visibly furious father-in-law, and his mother-in-law desperately fanning herself with a folded event program. The math does not remotely add up. The image of a polished, powerful tech mogul on the verge of a landmark corporate acquisition has not simply cracked. It has shattered completely beyond recovery. I watch through the camera as the investors begin reaching into their jacket pockets and pulling out their own phones. They are not taking photographs. They are not sending admiring messages to colleagues. They are opening their ride-sharing applications. They are done with this circus. Within minutes, a steady, deliberate stream of sleek black luxury SUVs begins appearing at the far end of my quiet, tree-lined street. The investors start moving toward them with the unhurried efficiency of people who have already made up their minds. Doors close, engines engage. Cars pull away from my curb in a quiet, devastating procession, each departing vehicle carrying away another piece of Trey's fabricated empire and another chunk of the investment capital he needs so desperately to keep his failing company alive. Trey runs. He actually physically runs down the driveway, waving both arms overhead, calling after them, pleading for just 5 more minutes while the police sort out this minor administrative misunderstanding. They do not look back. Madison is crying real tears now. Not the performed strategic variety she deployed moments ago, but the raw, genuine variety that surfaces when someone realizes the comfortable illusion they have been living inside was never real. My mother is frantically fanning her with both hands, alternating between murmured comfort and sharp, desperate glances toward the front door. My father paces back and forth across the burning concrete with his fists clenched, shooting furious, impotent glares directly into the lens of the porch camera, as though his anger alone, concentrated and sustained, might somehow shatter the glass and change what has already happened. The commotion is impossible to ignore, and in this neighborhood, impossible to forgive. My subdivision is an exclusive, ultra-wealthy enclave where noise, public disputes, and spectacles of any kind are not simply frowned upon. They are remembered, discussed, and held indefinitely against you by people with very long memories and very influential social networks. I switch to my panoramic street camera. Neighbors have emerged onto their manicured lawns and stone porches. A retired cardiothoracic surgeon across the street stands on his front steps with both arms crossed, watching in silent, composed disapproval. The affluent couple next door has stopped mid-walk to openly stare at the bizarre, cascading meltdown happening in my driveway, their golden retriever sitting patiently at their feet. My family is dismantling their own social standing in real time, in front of exactly the people it is most damaging to lose. Then the sharp, piercing sound of sirens cuts cleanly through the thick summer air. Red and blue light begins to pulse and reflect off the windows of the remaining parked cars. 2 local police cruisers turn the corner in tight formation and speed down the paved street, pulling up directly in front of my polished mailbox with practiced precision. The officers step out calmly, resting their hands on their duty belts and surveying the chaotic scene before them with the detached, practiced assessment of people who have seen many versions of this story. Trey recognizes his moment, his potential salvation, his final stage. He aggressively wipes the heavy sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, straightens his visibly wrinkled wool suit jacket, squares his shoulders, and undergoes a complete, instantaneous transformation of posture and demeanor. He puffs out his chest. He smooths his expression into something approximating composed authority. He strides confidently down the driveway toward the approaching officers like a man arriving at a press conference he personally scheduled. He extends his right hand with a broad, polished corporate smile, fully prepared to inhabit the role of the tragic, wronged executive whose legitimate business operations have been maliciously disrupted by a deranged criminal. The lead officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and an expression that suggests he has absolutely no patience for theatrics of any variety, glances at Trey's extended hand and does not take it. He simply gives a short, neutral nod and asks to see identification. Trey retracts his hand smoothly, entirely unbothered on the surface, and launches into his rehearsed narrative. He tells the officers that his company recently completed the acquisition of this residential property for use as a private corporate retreat facility. He explains that a disgruntled former tenant, unstable, resentful, and acting with clear malicious intent, has barricaded the property and changed the access codes, locking out his heavily pregnant wife and a large group of distinguished invited guests in extreme heat. The officer uncaps a small notepad, exhales slowly against the heat, and asks a single, flat, entirely reasonable question. Does he have physical proof of residence or a deed of ownership? Trey's smile does not waver. He reaches smoothly into his pocket for his phone. He swipes his screen and holds the phone up toward the officers for inspection. Displayed on the bright glass is a highly fabricated digital document, complete with fake watermarks, an elaborate counterfeit corporate seal, and formatting clearly designed to impress someone who does not look too closely. He explains smoothly that the physical paperwork is secured inside the house, but that the digital deed definitively proves his tech startup holds the full, legal title to the estate. The second officer squints at the glowing screen with open, unhurried skepticism, the practiced expression of someone who has been shown a great many compelling documents over the years and learned not to be moved by any of them. The two officers exchange a brief, loaded glance. They have worked wealthy neighborhoods before. They know, without needing to discuss it, that forced evictions require signed court orders issued by an actual judge, not a PDF file displayed on a personal smartphone in 95-degree heat. Sensing the officer's hesitation beginning to harden into something more permanent, my father steps aggressively into the frame. Richard produces a folded stack of thick, official-looking papers from the inside breast pocket of his jacket and presents it to the lead officer with the weary, put-upon expression of a man carrying a burden no one else fully appreciates. He explains that he is the financial co-signer on the property. He tells the police that the woman who is supposedly responsible for this situation is his estranged, mentally unstable daughter, currently in the grip of a severe psychological episode that has escalated dangerously beyond the family's ability to manage privately. He then hands over the forged guarantor draft, pointing directly and deliberately to my falsified signature at the bottom of the last page. He begs the officers, with the trembling urgency of a genuinely frightened parent, to break down the door, claiming he fears desperately for the physical safety of both the property and the heavily pregnant woman standing just behind him on the driveway. I am watching every frame of this from my lounge chair 2 hours away, the tablet propped on my knee, my mimosa sweating quietly on the table beside me. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of my father attempting to weaponize the local police department against me, using a forged legal document he personally fabricated, is genuinely staggering, even by the standards of what I have already witnessed this morning. He is willing to have me arrested, potentially removed from my own home by force, simply to salvage Trey's bruised and crumbling ego. I set my mimosa down on the glass table with a quiet, deliberate click. The time for silent observation is officially over. I open a secondary encrypted communication application on my tablet and dial my corporate attorney, David. He answers on the first ring, as he always does when my name appears on his screen, because calls from me at unusual hours have historically preceded situations of significant legal complexity. I brief him rapidly but completely on everything that has unfolded over the past 4 hours. Then, I merge the call with my smart home security application and route the audio output directly to the two-way intercom system installed flush into the exterior wall of my front porch. I press the microphone icon. My voice suddenly projects from the concealed outdoor speakers with crisp, full-bodied authority, reverberating across the scorching driveway, the manicured front lawn, and straight into the stunned faces of every single person standing outside my house. I say, with absolute ice-cold precision, "Good afternoon, officers. My name is Rebecca. I am the sole, unencumbered legal owner of the property you are currently standing on." The effect is immediate and total. The entire group flinches as one. Trey physically stumbles backward, dropping his smartphone onto the hard concrete where it lands with a sharp, expensive crack. Madison lets out a short, involuntary shriek and clutches her chest with both hands. My father spins completely around, staring wildly into the lens of the front porch camera, his face draining from flushed red to a pale, sickly gray in the span of about 2 seconds. The police officers immediately take a measured step back, hands instinctively moving toward their radios, eyes scanning the full width of the porch to locate the source of the disembodied voice with practiced, professional efficiency. I do not give my family a single second of breathing room to recover, regroup, or construct a counter-narrative. I continue speaking evenly through the intercom, my voice projecting with the same calm, measured authority I use when briefing Fortune 500 clients in the middle of catastrophic public scandals. I inform the officers that I am currently out of town attending a scheduled business retreat, and that the 4 individuals currently sweating on my private driveway are trespassers who arrived uninvited following the cancellation of a social event they neither organized nor funded. I then announce that I have my corporate attorney live on the line and ready to clarify, in full and specific legal detail, the ownership status of the estate and all documents currently in their possession. I tap the screen to unmute David. His voice fills the heavy summer air immediately, deep, authoritative, and carrying the particular weight of someone who is accustomed to being the most consequential person speaking in any room he enters. He introduces himself formally, provides his full name and state bar credential number for the officers to verify independently on their department computers, and wastes no time getting to the substance of the matter. David does not mince words. He never has, in the 12 years he has worked for me. He informs the officers calmly that the multi-million-dollar residential estate was purchased in full less than 30 days ago, using 100% liquid cash funds from my private limited liability company, a transaction fully documented, properly recorded, and available for immediate verification through the county property registrar. He confirms clearly that there is no mortgage, no lien, no cosigner, and no corporate acquisition of any kind pending, in progress, or even in preliminary discussion. Then David delivers the blow that changes the temperature of the entire scene. He states, on a recorded line that he has already made clear is being documented, that the digital deed tray displayed on his personal smartphone and the physical guarantor draft Richard is currently holding in his hand are both entirely fraudulent documents. He specifies that presenting forged instruments of this nature to sworn law enforcement officers constitutes a severe federal offense, one that compounds significantly with each person present who had prior knowledge of their fabrication. The lead officer's expression undergoes an immediate and unmistakable shift. The patient professional neutrality vanishes. What replaces it is something considerably harder and more purposeful. He turns to his partner and instructs him quietly but clearly to return to the cruiser and run the property address through the official county deed and title database right now. The tension on my driveway becomes something almost physical. A pressure in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. My father tries to backtrack. He begins stammering that there must be some sort of administrative mix-up at the bank, a clerical error in the filing, a misunderstanding between parties that can certainly be clarified with a few phone calls and a little patience. His voice has lost its commanding authority entirely. What remains sounds like a man reading from a script whose ending he can no longer predict. Trey says absolutely nothing. He stands with his jaw locked, staring down at the concrete with the vacant, hollow expression of someone watching their entire constructed reality collapse from the inside. Madison is moving her gaze frantically between the police officers and her husband, her hands pressed flat against her stomach, searching desperately for a signal from someone that this situation is still salvageable. The second officer steps out of the cruiser. He does not need to say much. He nods sharply at his partner and confirms in a clear, carrying voice that the estate is registered exclusively and without complication under my corporate limited liability company, and that there are absolutely no liens, no mortgages, no co-signers, and no competing claims of any kind attached to the recorded deed. The lead officer turns back toward my father and Trey. His voice, when he speaks, is not raised. It does not need to be. He points a firm, unambiguous finger toward the street and informs them that they have exactly 60 seconds to vacate the private property they are currently trespassing upon. If any of them remain on the driveway when that minute expires, every individual present will be placed in handcuffs and formally charged with criminal trespass. He adds, with the flat, unhurried tone of someone delivering a courtesy rather than a threat, that they are extraordinarily fortunate that my attorney has not yet formally demanded immediate federal charges for the forged documents, and that this window of fortune is closing rapidly. The few remaining tech investors who had lingered near the edge of the street, perhaps holding out some small hope that this situation might resolve itself into something coherent and explainable, now fully and finally understand what they have actually witnessed this afternoon. This was never a family misunderstanding. This was never a scheduling error or a communication breakdown. This was a deliberate, premeditated criminal fraud, and they were invited to serve as its unwitting audience and legitimizing witnesses. One investor, a silver-haired man in a navy blazer who has said nothing until this moment, turns and looks at Trey with an expression of complete and unvarnished contempt. He calls him a pathetic con artist, says it with the clipped, dismissive finality of a man closing a door on something unpleasant, then turns, walks to his waiting car, and pulls the door shut behind him without a backward glance. The final nail is driven cleanly into the coffin of Trey's fraudulent corporate empire, right in front of my security cameras, right in front of the watching neighbors, right in front of the police officers standing at the end of my driveway. The walk of shame down my long, manicured driveway that follows is one of the most comprehensive displays of defeat I have ever witnessed, even by the elevated standards of my professional career. My mother is weeping quietly, holding her expensive handbag up at an angle in front of her face. Not for comfort, but as a shield, so the neighbors watching from their porches cannot clearly see her expression. My father is already marching ahead of everyone else, shoulders rigid, face burning crimson with concentrated rage, having completely abandoned his pregnant daughter and his son-in-law to navigate the humiliation at their own pace. Trey moves like a man whose internal mechanisms have simply stopped, his shoulders slumped forward, his feet dragging slightly against the stone pathway, his expensive wool suit dark and ruined with sweat, his entire posture that of a balloon 2 days after the party. Then Madison completely, spectacularly, and with perfect timing loses whatever final, tenuous shred of composure she had been clutching. The precise moment her designer heels touch the municipal concrete of the public sidewalk, she erupts. She throws a screaming, full-bodied tantrum directly in the middle of the street, the kind of unrestrained emotional collapse that is more commonly associated with exhausted 4-year-olds in grocery store checkout lines than with adult women in designer maternity gowns. She stamps her feet. She shrieks at Trey, demanding to know in increasingly hysterical terms how he could possibly have allowed this to happen to her specifically. She announces loudly to no one and everyone simultaneously that she is a pregnant woman, that she deserves to be inside an air-conditioned house, and that she is going to lose consciousness from the heat at any moment. She violently swats away my mother's cautious, repeated attempts to soothe her, sending Susan stumbling backward a half step. The neighbors standing on their manicured lawns watch in stunned collective silence as a grown woman in a floor-length silk maternity gown has an absolute, unfiltered emotional meltdown on a public sidewalk in an exclusive residential neighborhood on a Monday afternoon. Trey needs to end this. He needs to get his screaming wife out of the open sun, away from the staring eyes, and into an enclosed space before what little remains of his professional reputation dissolves entirely into the hot afternoon air. He shoves his hand into his pocket and pulls out his key fob, moving quickly toward his sleek black Porsche Panamera parked along the curb. He clicks the unlock button and reaches for the door handle, intending to get Madison into the air conditioning and buy himself 30 seconds to think. His fingers do not reach the handle. The loud, industrial grinding of heavy diesel engine brakes suddenly cuts cleanly through Madison's shrieking, louder, harsher, and considerably more final. A massive heavy-duty tow truck reverses aggressively down the quiet residential street, its amber hazard lights strobing in the bright afternoon sun. The truck lurches to a stop directly parallel to Trey's car, with the practiced precision of someone who has performed this particular maneuver many hundreds of times before. The driver, a broad, unhurried man in a neon orange safety vest, drops out of the cab holding a metal clipboard, completely ignores Trey standing 3 feet away, and walks directly and purposefully toward the 2 police officers still stationed at the foot of my driveway. He hands the lead officer a neat stack of paperwork. The officer reviews it briefly, glances over at Trey, and gives the driver a single, firm nod of authorization. The driver turns back to his truck and begins pulling heavy steel hook assemblies from the rear equipment rack without a word. Trey drops his key fob somewhere on the grass. He sprints toward the driver, his voice rising rapidly into something between protest and pure panic. He shouts that there has been a significant mistake, that he made a full payment just last week, that there are records, that this can all be verified with one simple phone call, begging the driver with escalating desperation to stop, to wait, to please just stop for one moment. The driver does not look at him. He does not acknowledge that Trey is speaking. He simply continues working with the calm, unhurried efficiency of someone who does not negotiate at the curb. He announces loudly for the benefit of everyone within earshot that he holds a certified bank repossession order for the vehicle, issued due to 6 consecutive months of unpaid lease installments on a contract that has been in default since the previous autumn. Right there, in front of the 2 police officers, the frozen neighbors, my horrified parents, and his shrieking mascara-streaked wife, Trey's prized leased, never actually, his Porsche Panamera is hoisted smoothly into the air by the steel hook assembly and towed away down the street at a stately, unhurried pace. The heavy diesel engine note of the tow truck fades slowly into the distance, growing smaller and quieter, and then entirely gone, leaving behind a silence on the front curb so complete and so suffocating that it feels like a physical substance pressing in from all sides. Trey stands on the sidewalk with his arms hanging completely limp at his sides, staring at the empty patch of sun-bleached asphalt where his primary symbol of manufactured success existed 10 minutes ago. He does not move. He does not speak. He simply stares, as though the absence of the car in that specific spot is a philosophical problem he cannot resolve. The lead officer checks his watch without particular urgency and reminds them, in the flat, administrative tone of someone completing a form, that they now have fewer than 30 seconds remaining to vacate the subdivision before he begins writing criminal trespass citations for every individual still present on the property. The practicalities of their situation crash into Madison's panic simultaneously and all at once. She realizes, with the specific quality of terror that comes from a very concrete problem, that they are stranded. No car, no shade, no water, 95 degrees, inside a gated community, with 2 police officers watching. She digs frantically into her designer purse, pulls out her phone with shaking hands, and opens the ride-sharing application to request a premium SUV large enough to accommodate 4 people. She drops the phone on the hot concrete, picks it up, drops it again. Finally manages to complete the request and reaches the payment screen. The bright red error message that appears across her display is almost audible in its silence. Her primary gold credit card is declined. She makes a small, strangled sound, the involuntary noise of someone who has just experienced their financial floor giving way beneath them. She types in the numbers for her backup card, the one she reserves for emergencies, the one she has always privately relied on as proof that things could never get truly, catastrophically bad. Declined. The financial reporting I initiated that morning, alerting the appropriate authorities to Trey's documented fraud the moment I walked out my front door, is already cascading through their interconnected accounts, with the swift, indifferent efficiency of automated systems doing exactly what they were designed to do. Madison looks up from her phone screen. Her face, stripped now of every performance, every practiced expression, every layer of careful presentation, shows something raw and genuinely frightened. She turns to my mother and says, in a voice that has lost all of its customary edge, that her accounts are frozen. Susan, standing several feet away with the expression of someone who has just arrived at a party to discover it ended badly several hours ago, looks at the wealthy neighbors still watching from their carefully maintained porches and lawns. She reaches into her own wallet with visibly trembling fingers, inputs her personal credit card information into Madison's phone screen, and completes the ride request with the subdued, mortified energy of someone trying to be invisible while standing in the middle of a very large, very public spotlight. For 10 of the longest, most exquisitely uncomfortable minutes of their collective lives, all 4 of them are required to stand at the edge of the curb and simply wait. They sweat through their expensive clothing in the unrelenting heat, enduring the open, unblinking scrutiny of the neighborhood, the whispered conversations between walking couples, the second glances from gardeners who have found reasons to be near the front hedges, the slow, deliberate judgment of people who live in a place where scenes of this particular variety are not forgotten or forgiven easily. When the black Chevrolet Suburban finally turns onto the street, all 4 of them move toward it with a speed and lack of coordination that suggests each one is primarily motivated by getting there before the others. They pile into the air-conditioned cabin in a tangle of expensive fabric, slammed doors, and the particular silence of 4 people who have far too much to say to each other and absolutely no interest in saying any of it in front of a stranger. I know precisely what happens next, because in her frantic, distracted state, my mother forgets entirely to lock her phone screen before shoving it back into her cluttered bag. She accidentally dials my number. Sitting in my quiet mountain cabana 2 hours away, I watch my phone screen illuminate with an incoming call from Susan. I do not answer it. I allow it to route directly to my secure corporate voicemail system and wait. 5 minutes later, my phone delivers an audio file, a detailed high-definition accidental recording of the complete implosion of my family, captured in real time from the interior of a luxury SUV on a Monday afternoon. I put in my wireless earbuds, settle back against the cushions of the lounge chair, take a long sip of my drink, and listen. The moment the heavy car door slams shut and the driver pulls away from the curb, the performance ends. The carefully maintained masks, the concerned father, the heartbroken mother, the fragile pregnant wife, the visionary entrepreneur, all drop simultaneously, like curtains falling at the end of a show no one applauded. Madison strikes first. Her voice, freed entirely from the constraints of public presentation, is shrill, precise, and venomous in the way that only comes from years of practice. She demands to know how Trey could possibly allow his car to be physically repossessed in front of 50 people from the investment community. She tells him he is a fraud, a complete embarrassment, a man who built a magnificent facade over nothing real whatsoever. She says she married a successful technology executive. She did not agree to raise a child with a man who cannot maintain current payments on his own vehicle lease. Trey does not absorb it quietly. His ego, which has survived an impressive amount of pressure today before finally fracturing, gives way entirely, and what emerges from the wreckage is immediate, cornered, and ugly. He shouts back with equal force, telling her that her relentless, compulsive spending habits systematically drained whatever legitimate working capital his company managed to accumulate before the enterprise ever had a chance to stabilize and grow. He itemizes it with the specific, scalding accuracy of a man who has been quietly cataloging this list for a long time and has finally been given permission to read it aloud. Then he pivots. The fury finds a more specific, more satisfying target, and Trey directs the full weight of it toward the man sitting in the front passenger seat. He screams at my father. He says this entire catastrophic situation, every ruined relationship, every departed investor, every moment of public humiliation, is Richard's fault, specifically and entirely. He accuses my father of guaranteeing that the forged guarantor draft was airtight, that my signature was indistinguishable, that I would be managed, controlled, and predictable. He tells Richard that he underestimated me in a way that is unforgivable. He says Richard failed to account for the possibility that I might actually fight back, and that this failure, this single, fundamental miscalculation, has cost Trey everything. Richard explodes with a force that visibly distorts the audio on the recording. His voice, booming and uncontrolled in a way I have not heard since childhood, overpowers the small speaker of my earbuds with a burst of furious static. He curses at Trey with a comprehensive, creative thoroughness that would have been impressive under different circumstances. He bellows that he committed a federal crime, to fund a startup that turned out to be built on nothing but expensive suits and borrowed confidence. He screams that he put his own name, his own freedom, and his own future on a line he cannot uncross, and that this is the gratitude, the dignity, the basic human respect he receives in return. The recording becomes pure, sustained chaos. My mother is crying in the background. Not the measured, strategic tears she deploys in public, but the wet, unglamorous, genuinely distressed crying of a woman who has run completely out of scripts and finds herself in a situation her entire life has failed to prepare her for. She begs them repeatedly, in an increasingly desperate voice, to please lower their volume because the driver is sitting 3 feet away and can hear every syllable of a conversation that contains multiple admissions of federal criminal conspiracy. The inside of that luxury Suburban has become a sealed, climate-controlled pressure cooker of blame, resentment, and the particular despair of people who have genuinely, completely, with great investment of time and effort, destroyed themselves. Then my father slams his fist against the car door so hard it cuts cleanly through the noise of everyone else speaking simultaneously. Richard commands silence. He gets it. Not because anyone respects him in this moment, but because the force of the sound is startling enough to interrupt the feedback loop of mutual recrimination for a few seconds. His voice drops. It does not soften. It compresses. It becomes the quiet, deliberate, calculating growl I remember from childhood as the most dangerous register he possesses. He tells them to stop panicking. He tells them that panicking is for people who have already given up, and they have not given up yet. He tells them they will go to my office first thing Monday morning. His voice carries the dark, settled confidence of a man who believes he still holds a card worth playing. He says, I cannot do this to family. He says he knows exactly where my weaknesses are, and that a direct confrontation on my professional territory, where my concern for public image and institutional reputation will force me to be reasonable, manageable, and ultimately compliant, is the pressure point that will break my resolve. My father's recorded threat settles in my earbuds as the Suburban drives away from my neighborhood and disappears into the afternoon. I already know exactly what they are planning. I have known since the moment I heard his voice compress into that particular register on the recording. They believe they can back me into a corner on my own professional ground, use the threat of a scene, of public embarrassment, of disruption to my carefully built professional reputation, to force my hand and manufacture a version of capitulation that they can frame as family reconciliation. They have never once, in 33 years, correctly assessed what I am capable of when the circumstances require it. They are about to learn. Monday morning arrives with the crisp, clean efficiency of a well-organized closing argument. My public relations firm occupies the entire top floor of a downtown high-rise tower, 32 floors above street level. The space is a precisely calibrated environment of polished marble, floor-to-ceiling glass walls, and the particular kind of productive silence that comes from 35 extremely competent people who understand the value of their time. Everything in the office, from the placement of the reception desk to the sightlines through the conference room walls, has been deliberately, intentionally designed. At exactly 9:30 in the morning, the elevator doors on our floor slide open. My receptionist, Claire, a razor-sharp woman who has successfully managed the arrivals of senators, celebrities, and one memorably difficult billionaire, stands up from her desk the moment she processes what she is looking at. 4 deeply agitated, visibly depleted people are marching across the lobby with the forward momentum of people who have made a decision and are committed to it regardless of consequences. Richard leads the formation, wearing a dark suit and the expression of a man exercising a right he has carried his entire life and intends to exercise now regardless of what anyone says about it. Susan follows directly behind him, her purse gripped in both hands with the white-knuckled intensity of someone holding on to something for stability. Madison has selected another dramatic maternity dress for the occasion and is performing her lower back discomfort with the broad, visible gestures of someone playing to the back row of a theater. Trey trails the group at a slight distance, exhausted, stripped of his polish, moving with the particular heaviness of a man walking towards something he cannot avoid and does not expect to survive. Claire raises one hand, poised and unhurried, and informs them pleasantly but clearly that I do not take unannounced meetings and asks whether they would like her to check my calendar for available. Richard speaks over her before she finishes the sentence. He raises his voice and announces that he is my father and that he will speak with me immediately. He informs her that he will remain in the lobby for as long as it takes and will make whatever disruption to the environment of this office is necessary to secure my attention. He says it the way he used to say things to me when I was 8 years old and had done something he disapproved of. He expects me to panic. He expects me to hear through the closed door of my private office that my father is raising his voice in my lobby, in front of my staff, in front of the clean, professional image I have built over 10 years, and come rushing out with my hands up, ready to smooth things over quietly in a back room where the damage is contained and no one else has to see. He still fundamentally, completely, stubbornly believes I am the little girl who was afraid of his temper. I have been at my desk since 8 o'clock. I have already been to the FBI field office and back. I have been waiting for this moment with the particular calm of someone who has planned for every contingency and is genuinely, quietly curious to see which one materializes. I press the button on my desk console and instruct Claire to let them through. I step out of my private office, but I do not take them into the back corridor. I do not usher them into a quiet, enclosed anteroom away from observation. I walk them directly and deliberately into the main executive conference room, situated in the exact geographic center of the open office floor, enclosed on all 4 sides by floor-to-ceiling panels of transparent, soundproofed architectural glass. Every one of my 35 employees, seated at their sleek individual workstations on the surrounding floor, has a completely unobstructed, high-definition view into that room from any angle. It is a calculated, precise psychological instrument. My family has operated its entire life in the shadows, constructing narratives in dim apartments, forging documents in private, plotting over wine glasses in rooms where no one else can see or hear. Their power has always depended on the absence of witnesses and the availability of plausible deniability. By placing them in a literal, transparent glass box in the center of a professional office floor, I am removing both simultaneously. Whatever happens in that room is observed. Whatever is said is witnessed. Whatever performance they attempt is watched by 35 people who are very, very good at reading situations for exactly what they are. My family has no shadows left to operate in. They are on full, complete, unavoidable public display. I watch their faces register the transparency as they walk through the door. A small, involuntary flicker of unease, crossing each expression as the glass closes behind them, and they become aware that they are being seen from every direction at once. The acoustic seal on the heavy door hisses shut, cutting the sound of the outer office to absolute silence and sealing us into our own enclosed atmosphere. I walk to the head of the long mahogany table and settle into the leather executive chair without rush or ceremony. I do not offer anything to drink. I do not make small talk or ask how they are, whether they ate breakfast, or how the drive downtown was. I place my hands flat on the polished wood surface and allow the silence to exist for exactly as long as it needs to. Resting directly in front of me, centered on the table with deliberate placement, is a substantial black binder, 3 inches thick, packed densely with printed financial spreadsheets, certified bank statements, legal filings, and forensic accounting reports prepared by some of the most ruthlessly thorough financial investigators my firm retains on standing contract. I allow the binder to sit there in silence for a moment before placing my hand on it. When it makes contact with the mahogany surface, the physical weight of it produces a dull, heavy, resonant thud that carries clearly in the enclosed room. Trey stares at it. A single visible bead of perspiration forms at his right temple and begins its slow descent. Susan does not wait for everyone to find a chair before launching into her performance. She moves with the well-practiced urgency of someone who understands that the opening moments of a confrontation set its emotional tone and intends to control that tone before I can establish my own. She pulls a crisp tissue from her purse and begins carefully, methodically dabbing at eyes that contain absolutely no moisture. Her voice assumes the trembling, fractured quality she has perfected over decades of deploying it strategically against people who still respond to it. She tells me, holding my gaze with the particular intensity of a woman who has learned to believe her own performances, that I have broken her heart. She claims that my cruel and deliberately vindictive behavior on Sunday subjected Madison to severe abdominal cramping caused by heat exhaustion, a medical event that was entirely my responsibility and entirely preventable. She points a shaking finger across the table and informs me that I owe my sister an immediate, unconditional apology for placing her unborn child at risk. Then she instructs me to open my checkbook and repair the damage I have caused. Richard stands beside her, arms crossed with architectural firmness, nodding with the solemn, measured authority of a man second in command of a righteous position. They expect me to wilt. They expect the accumulated force of a mother's performed grief and a father's stern displeasure to collapse my resolve the way it did when I was a child, with no resources, no alternatives, and nowhere to go. I do not look at my mother. I do not acknowledge the tissue, the trembling voice, or the accusations it carries. I keep my eyes level and locked on Trey. I reach forward, place my palm flat on the cover of the binder, and slide it smoothly across the mahogany surface. It travels the length of the table and comes to a precise stop directly in front of my brother-in-law. I lean back in my chair, steeple my fingers together, and speak with the specific quality of calm that is not the absence of feeling, but the absolute, total command of it. I say, let us talk about Trey's crypto scam instead. The word scam lands in the conditioned air of the glass room with the clean, decisive impact of a surgical instrument. The elaborate, carefully maintained illusion my family carried through the lobby and into this building fractures visibly. I can see it happening in real time across 4 different faces. Trey's posture changes in an instant. The defeated exhaustion he wore through the lobby is replaced by something sharper and considerably more alarming: sheer, unmasked panic. He reaches instinctively across the mahogany table for the binder with both hands. I place my palm on top of it with quiet, complete finality. He stops. I flip the heavy cover open to the first page, a detailed, meticulously organized forensic accounting summary of his corporate entity. Every transaction, every account, every fabricated document, laid out with the cold precision of people who are paid specifically to find things that other people have invested considerable effort in hiding. I look directly into his eyes and begin dismantling his professional life with the methodical calm of someone who has done this before and knows exactly where to begin. I explain that his technology startup is, at its structural foundation, a textbook Ponzi scheme built entirely on worthless proprietary cryptocurrency tokens and manipulated financial spreadsheets with no underlying asset value. There is no proprietary software. There is no legitimate revenue stream of any kind. The entire operation runs on a single, unsustainable mechanism: collecting large amounts of new investor capital and using it to manufacture the dividend returns promised to earlier backers, creating the perpetual, self-consuming illusion of a functioning, profitable business. The surplus has been systematically directed toward leasing a Porsche he cannot afford, purchasing suits at prices that require financing, and sustaining a lifestyle that exists entirely on other people's money. The silence inside the glass conference room is complete and absolute. My parents stare at the spreadsheet page I slide across the table toward them with the blankly stunned expression of people encountering a language they cannot read. Susan's tissue has stopped moving. The tears have not materialized. I do not pause to let anyone speak. I turn to the next page in the binder. The numbers printed there are in vivid, arresting red, a column of negative figures descending the page with the relentless momentum of a verdict being read aloud. I look across the table at Madison. She is holding her stomach. The color has left her face in a slow, comprehensive retreat that makes her look like a photograph that has been left in sunlight too long. I give her the truth about the man she married without softening a single edge of it. I tell the room that Trey currently carries a personal debt of $1.5 million, owed to a collection of highly aggressive, largely unregulated private lenders, the kind of financial actors who do not send polite reminder letters, do not offer payment plans, and do not respond well to requests for extensions. These are the people who send tow trucks on a Sunday afternoon in a residential neighborhood. These are the people who are already aware of Trey's address, his assets, and his movements. These are the people whose presence in a situation like this has historically produced outcomes that extend well beyond the inconvenient. I watch the specific, particular realization I intended spread across my parents' faces. The dawning comprehension that the charming, successful son-in-law they have been protecting, enabling, and committing federal crimes to support is not simply struggling. He is catastrophically exposed, in every possible direction, to consequences that do not negotiate. I explained that the elaborate party yesterday had nothing to do with celebrating a pregnancy. It was a desperate, theatrical piece of performance art mounted by a man who had run out of legitimate options and was attempting to manufacture one final, spectacular illusion before the structural failure of his entire enterprise became too visible to conceal. He invited 50 wealthy investors to my home because he needed a physical symbol of success, enormous enough to temporarily override their due diligence instincts. He needed my estate, its scale, its value, its tangible reality, to serve as the stage set for his announcement. His goal was to generate $2 million in emergency investment capital on the spot, transferred that same day, before anyone looked closely enough at the numbers to ask the right questions. I place my index finger on the forged guarantor draft resting inside the binder and look directly at my father. I tell him that his signature forgery was the insurance policy Trey needed in case the investors walked, which, as it turned out, they did. With my credit score attached as a guarantor, Trey could have accessed a bridge loan large enough to buy himself perhaps 6 more weeks before the architecture of the fraud collapsed completely and permanently. Trey has reached the limit of what he can absorb while remaining seated. He comes out of the leather chair with a velocity that is genuinely startling, a sudden, violent upward motion that sends the chair rolling backward and strikes both of his palms against the mahogany surface with a force that sends a visible vibration through the glass walls of the conference room. His face, contorted with the specific ugliness of a man watching everything he built be named accurately for the first time, is directed entirely at me. He screams that I am a jealous, miserable liar who fabricated every document in that binder specifically to destroy his marriage, humiliate him professionally, and sabotage his success out of a petty, lifelong sibling rivalry. He demands that my parents disregard everything I have presented, insisting with the desperate force of a drowning man that his company is entirely legitimate, entirely legal, and entirely capable of fighting these baseless accusations through every available legal channel. Outside the glass walls, my employees have paused. Keyboards are still. They watch the silent visual of a man in a wrinkled suit screaming at their employer with the focused, professional attention of people who have worked in crisis management long enough to recognize what a crisis actually looks like. I do not flinch. I do not push back from the table. I do not raise my voice or change my posture in any detectable way. I reach into the breast pocket of my suit jacket, produce my smartphone, and set it gently on the table beside the open binder with the unhurried calm of someone placing the final card in a hand they have already won. I wake the screen. Displayed on it is a confirmed delivery receipt from a federal government email domain, timestamped 8:14 that morning. I look up at Trey and match his fury with complete, total, unbroken apathy. I say, "The FBI did not think I was lying when I hand-delivered this exact binder to their field office at 8 o'clock this morning." 3 letters. 8 o'clock. Field office. The words hit him like a physical impact. Every ounce of color drains from his face with the speed and totality of a light being switched off, leaving behind a person who looks hollow, almost architectural, as if the structure that was keeping the appearance of a man in place has simply been removed. His knees bend. He lowers himself back into the leather chair not by choice, but by the absence of the ability to remain upright. He stares at the glowing phone screen with the fixed, vacant attention of someone for whom the concept of the immediate future has just become suddenly, entirely, and permanently rearranged. The reality of a federal investigation, with its grand juries, its asset freezes, its minimum sentencing guidelines, and its absolute indifference to charm, is sitting in the middle of the mahogany table between us, and everyone in the room can see it clearly. My father abandons his flanking position beside my mother. His intimidation strategy has made contact with a wall it cannot penetrate, and Richard, to his credit as a tactician if nothing else, recognizes this immediately and adapts. He steps around the table and places himself directly between me and Trey, using his physical size the way he always has, as a statement of authority, as a reminder of hierarchy, as a pressure applied through proximity. He extends one thick finger toward me. His voice returns to the specific tone and register he used when I was a child and had done something that required immediate, unconditional correction. He orders me to open my corporate accounts. He says that I am the successful founder of a lucrative enterprise with millions in liquid assets, and that I have both the means and the obligation to resolve this situation before it reaches a point of no return. He demands that I wire $1.5 million to Trey's private lenders by the close of business today. He invokes family. He invokes blood. He invokes the roof they put over my head, and the years they invested in raising me, and the debt he is absolutely certain I still carry for both. I do not stand up. I do not raise my voice. I simply look at the man who has spent 33 years believing that volume and paternal authority were sufficient substitutes for genuine accountability. I take a slow, measured breath, and I pull out the one piece of history I have kept carefully, deliberately buried for 15 years. Not because I was ashamed of it, but because I was saving it for exactly this kind of moment. I ask him if he remembers the morning of my 18th birthday. I remind him, in the specific, detailed language of someone who has never once stopped remembering, that I had just received a university acceptance letter along with a partial merit scholarship. The result of 4 years of maintaining perfect grades in a household that offered neither financial support nor consistent encouragement, while working part-time jobs and tutoring other students on evenings and weekends to supplement what I was building toward. I tell the room that over the course of those 4 years, I had saved $40,000. Every paycheck, every tutoring fee, every birthday card envelope, deposited with disciplined regularity into a joint savings account that my father held legal control over because I was a minor when I opened it, and because I trusted him. Then I turn and look directly at my sister. I remind Madison of the night she took my father's luxury sedan without asking, drove it while heavily intoxicated with friends from a party, and struck the storefront window of a local business at a speed that required significant structural repair and triggered a formal civil lawsuit from the business owner against our family. I turn my gaze back to my father. I tell him that he did not want his younger daughter to carry a criminal record or face the legal and financial consequences of her actions in a way that might complicate her future. I tell him that without asking me, without giving me a warning, without offering a single word of explanation or apology before or after, he drained every penny of my $40,000 college fund to pay for Madison's out-of-court settlement and make the lawsuit disappear quietly. He stole my future to insulate her from the consequences of her choices. I remember the day I discovered what had happened. I was standing in the kitchen holding the bank statement, staring at a balance of $0.14 where 4 years of sacrifice used to be. I remember asking him for an explanation through tears I could not stop. I remember the specific expression on his face. Not regret, not guilt, but a kind of flat, impatient indifference, as though my grief was a minor inconvenience he did not have time to accommodate. He told me that Madison needed the money more, and that I was smart enough to figure the rest out on my own. I lean forward and place my elbows on the edge of the mahogany table, closing the physical distance between us by a precise and deliberate measure. I tell Richard that he was right. I did figure it out. Being stripped completely of my savings and financially abandoned by the two people whose specific, defined role was to support me, forced me to build everything I have from an absolute foundation of nothing. It made me harder than I would have been otherwise. It made me more capable, more resourceful, and more immune to the particular pressure tactics that work on people who still need something from the person applying them. It taught me, permanently and without the possibility of revision, that the only person I have ever been able to rely on without qualification is myself. I tell him that I paid my debt to this family 15 years ago, the morning my college fund bought Madison her clean record and her comfortable, consequence-free future. I owe this family nothing further. I will not transfer a single dollar of my corporate funds to cover the debts of a brother-in-law who attempted to steal my home, or a father who committed federal wire fraud and then attempted to use the local police department as a collection instrument against me. The silence inside the glass room becomes a presence of its own, something with weight and texture, pressing into the spaces between us. My mother is staring at the floor, unable to sustain eye contact with any surface in the room that reflects back what she knows. Madison has shifted in her chair with the restless, contained discomfort of someone whose past has just arrived in the present with full documentation. But Richard, whose entire sense of self is constructed on the premise that he does not lose arguments and does not accept outcomes he has not approved, has not finished. His face darkens to a deep, furious crimson. He moves with sudden, sharp violence, his heavy hand coming down on the back of Trey's leather chair with a crack that rattles the glass walls and fills the conference room with a shout that my employees outside can see, even if they cannot hear it through the soundproofed panels. That was completely different. Madison was just a child. The heavy glass door of the conference room clicks open. A young voice, clear, composed, and carrying the specific authority of someone who has decided they are no longer willing to be quiet, cuts through the tension of the room with the clean, uncomplicated force of something that has been held back for a very long time and has finally found its moment. The voice says, "Madison is a monster." Every head in the conference room turns simultaneously toward the doorway. Standing directly in the threshold, backpack slung over one shoulder, wearing the navy blue and white uniform of an elite private high school, is Zoe, Trey's 16-year-old daughter from his previous marriage. She is holding herself with the kind of stillness that is not the absence of feeling but the absolute command of it. Her chin is level. Her eyes are clear. She radiates, in the particular way that very young people sometimes do when they have survived something that should have broken them, a quiet strength that makes every adult in the room look considerably smaller by comparison. Trey stares at her. His jaw drops with the specific quality of a man who has just been confronted simultaneously by his last remaining vulnerability and the realization that he has comprehensively failed it. He forgets, for a visible moment, about the FBI receipt glowing on the table beside him. He stammers. He asks what she is doing downtown instead of in her chemistry class. He attempts, with the depleted resources of his parental authority, to instruct her to wait in the lobby because the adults are engaged in a complex business discussion. Zoe does not wait. She does not go to the lobby. She steps fully into the conference room, allows the heavy glass door to seal behind her, walks with complete deliberateness past her father, past my parents, and comes to stand directly beside my leather chair. She places one hand lightly on the edge of the table. She looks down at Madison, who is clutching her stomach and has gone the color of old paper, and speaks into the crystalline silence of the room with the careful, complete enunciation of someone making sure that every word is heard and recorded by every person present. She says, "Madison is a monster, and I am the one who sent the video." The collective inhale in the room is audible even through the soundproofing. A synchronized gasp from four adults who have just had the architecture of everything they thought they controlled collapse simultaneously. Susan covers her mouth with both hands. Richard's face goes blank. Not the blankness of shock, but the particular emptiness of a man who has just lost his ability to process what is happening in front of him. Trey launches upright from his chair with an energy that has nothing to do with professional outrage and everything to do with the specific primal panic of a parent who has just realized the person he most underestimated was living inside his own home. He demands to know, with the voice of someone who does not actually want the answer, what his own daughter thought she was doing, why she would betray her family, and what possible grievance she could be carrying that would justify destroying his life over what he dismisses, even now, as a stupid grudge. Zoe meets his eyes without flinching. She explains that she ordered a small, motion-activated security camera online 2 weeks ago. She did not purchase it to capture a real estate fraud conspiracy. She did not set it up out of spite or adolescent rebellion or a desire to cause harm. She installed it because she needed evidence. She needed proof that would be believed by someone who had the power to act on it. Because she had already learned, through repeated and painful experience, that her word alone was not enough. She tells the room what happened inside that apartment when Trey left for his networking events and his investor dinners, and his endless professional obligations that seemed to require his constant absence. She describes how, the moment he was gone, Madison stopped performing the version of herself she showed to the world. She explains the small thefts, her skincare products, the cash I secretly tucked into her birthday cards, and the way they were conducted with the casual entitlement of someone who does not consider the things belonging to a stepdaughter to be genuinely protected by the concept of private property. Then she describes what was worse. She tells the room, in the direct and specific language of someone who has rehearsed these words, because precision matters when describing something this important, about Madison's racism. She explains how her stepmother would corner her in the kitchen and make degrading, contemptuous comments about the color of her skin and the texture of her natural hair. Comments designed to diminish, to isolate, to make a 16-year-old girl feel that her own appearance was something shameful that placed her outside the boundaries of the family she was legally part of. She tells the room how Madison reminded her, regularly, that she was leftover baggage from Trey's past. A complication, an inconvenience, a temporary arrangement. She tells them that Madison told her, directly and without apparent discomfort, that once the new baby arrived, Zoe would be replaced, made redundant, surplus to requirements, quietly moved aside to make room for the child who actually belonged. Zoe looks at her father and tells him, without raising her voice, that she set up the camera because she knew, from every previous attempt, every conversation that ended with him choosing not to believe her, that she would need undeniable visual evidence before anyone in that household would take her seriously about anything. She checked the memory card on Saturday morning, hoping to catch Madison taking her gold necklace. Instead, she found 47 minutes of footage she was not looking for, featuring her father, her stepmother, and my parents drinking expensive wine around a coffee table and meticulously, cheerfully plotting to forge my signature on a fraudulent loan document and steal a $2.5 million property that had never been theirs and never would be. Zoe looks down at me. Her expression, for the first time since she walked through the door, softens. Not into vulnerability, but in. Zoe looks down at me. Her expression, for the first time since she walked through the door, softens. Not into vulnerability, but into something warmer and more specific. She tells the room that I am the only person in this family who has ever consistently treated her as a full human being with interior life, actual needs, and inherent worth, not as a logistical complication or a reminder of an inconvenient previous chapter. So she extracted the video, encrypted it, and sent it directly to my phone number from an unknown account she created specifically for that purpose, early on a Saturday morning while everyone else in the apartment was still asleep. The revelation lands in the conference room like a structural change in the building itself, something fundamental that cannot be undone and cannot be argued with. Madison shrinks backward in her chair, her carefully maintained composure dissolving entirely as the specific documented details of her behavior are named aloud in front of witnesses. She has no available lie for this. The specificity of what Zoe has described, combined with the existence of the footage she captured, closes every exit she would normally use. My parents stare at their younger daughter as though they are looking at a photograph they do not recognize, processing the gap between the child they thought they knew and the person being described in clinical detail by a teenager who had no reason to fabricate any of it. Trey has no processing capacity remaining for the financial fraud, the FBI receipt, the guardianship petition, or any of the other converging catastrophes pressing in on him from every direction. He has reached the specific, singular breaking point of a man who has discovered that the person responsible for dismantling everything he constructed is someone he was supposed to protect, and that his failure in that responsibility is the one thing he cannot reframe, recontextualize, or lawyer his way out of. He comes out of his chair and lunges across the mahogany table toward his daughter with the blind, furious momentum of someone who has lost every form of rational judgment simultaneously. He does not make it halfway. The heavy glass doors of the conference room open with a controlled, decisive force, and two of my corporate security personnel, former military contractors, both considerably larger and considerably more trained than Trey, enter the room and intercept him before his hands can reach anything. They bring him to the floor with the efficient, practiced certainty of people who have done this before and will not be surprised by anything he does next. The impact of his body against the polished hardwood sends a vibration through the soles of my shoes that I can feel clearly from the head of the table. They pin his arms behind his back. They apply precise, calibrated pressure to his shoulder blades. He gasps. He struggles for approximately 3 seconds before understanding, through the direct physical communication of restraint, that he is not getting up until someone with authority in this room decides he can. I stand, walk around the long mahogany table, and position myself in his field of vision, looking down at the man who attempted to steal my home, forge my legal identity, and use my own professionalism as a mechanism of control. I instruct the guards to hold him where he is but allow him to speak. He looks up at me from the floor with an expression of concentrated, impotent hatred and demands to know what kind of sick arrangement I have with his daughter and what I think I am accomplishing by involving a teenager in whatever game I am playing. I crouch slightly, reducing the distance between us until I am certain that every word I say will reach him with complete clarity and zero possibility of misinterpretation. I tell him, this is not a game. I tell him that Zoe and I have been in regular, private contact for the past 8 months, initiated by her, sustained by both of us, conducted entirely outside his awareness, because his awareness was never something either of us required. I tell him that while he was charging restaurant dinners and wardrobe upgrades to accounts funded by investors whose money was not his to spend, his daughter was attending school without lunch money on a consistent basis. I tell him that I am the reason she has a funded cafeteria account. I tell him that I purchased her advanced placement course textbooks when the school's course materials budget ran out, and the district declined to cover the shortfall. I tell him that when she sends me a text message at 11 o'clock at night because she is frightened or overwhelmed or simply needs to speak with someone who will respond with honesty and care, I answer it, because I am the person in her life who does. Trey attempts to shake his head. He attempts denial. It is a very small, very late gesture. Zoe steps forward to stand beside me, looks down at her father with an expression that has moved entirely beyond anger into something quieter and more final, and confirms everything I have said with a single, steady nod. She tells him that I have been more of a parent to her from a distance than he has managed to be living in the same apartment. I straighten up, walk back to the head of the table, reach past the open binder and pick up a sealed manila envelope. I carry it back to where Trey is pinned on the floor and drop it directly in front of his face. It hits the hardwood with a sharp, flat impact. I tell him precisely what it contains. It is a fully drafted, legally binding petition for emergency temporary guardianship of Zoe, filed with the family court this morning in simultaneous coordination with the federal fraud complaint. The petition documents, in comprehensive and legally actionable detail, his gross parental negligence, his pending federal indictment for wire fraud, and the structural financial instability that makes his household an unsuitable environment for a dependent minor, regardless of the outcome of the criminal proceedings. I point across the room at Madison, still pressed against the far glass wall with the maximum available distance between herself and her husband. I inform Trey that the petition includes a dedicated, thoroughly documented section addressing Madison's pattern of psychological abuse and racially motivated discrimination against a minor in her household, supported by the same security footage that provided the real estate conspiracy evidence, along with a documented timeline of incidents Zoe reported to me over the course of our 8 months of correspondence. The security camera footage Zoe captured is not simply evidence of a fraudulent acquisition scheme. It is Exhibit A in a family court guardianship filing that describes, in clinical and specific terms, why the household in which she currently lives is actively harmful to her development, safety, and well-being. Trey is hyperventilating now. The full, complete, 360-degree scope of his destruction is surrounding him from every direction simultaneously. The FBI complaint, the guardianship petition, the departed investors, the repossessed car, the frozen accounts, the $1.5 million in creditor debt, and the teenager standing beside his employer who has documented everything with the patience and foresight of someone who understood that the truth, on its own, was never going to be sufficient. He looks at my father with the desperation of a man searching the wreckage for any solid object to hold on to. He begs Richard to intervene, to call lawyers, to exercise whatever authority he imagines he still possesses in this situation. Richard says nothing. He stands at the side of the conference room looking out through the glass walls at the open office floor, where 35 people are quietly observing everything, and processes the specific reality that his own forged signature is currently sitting in a manila folder on an FBI analyst's desk. Trey turns to his wife. He calls her name. His voice has shed every layer of performance and confidence and manufactured authority. What remains is the raw, cracking sound of a person asking for something they need desperately and have no leverage to request. He asks her to tell everyone that none of it is true. He asks her to say she loves Zoe, that they are a family, that they can fight this together, that they are still the people she told the world they were. Madison stands against the glass wall and looks at her husband pinned to the floor of my conference room. I watch her process the arithmetic of her situation with the unsentimental efficiency of someone for whom affection has always been a strategy rather than a feeling. Trey has no money. His company is a fraudulent construction with no surviving credibility. His car is on a truck somewhere in the city. He owes $1.5 million to the kind of people who do not accept installment plans. The federal government is actively, formally, and irreversibly interested in his recent financial activities. He is no longer a wealthy tech executive. He is a broke, desperate man with a federal criminal investigation attached to his name, looking at a future that contains none of the things she signed the marriage certificate for. Madison does not offer him a word of comfort. She does not reach toward him. She does not defend him or stand beside him or ask the guards to let him up. Instead, she steps away. She pushes her chair back with a sound that cuts across the room, puts physical distance between herself and the man on the floor with the deliberate, final energy of someone closing a chapter rather than a door, and presses her back against the transparent wall as if placing the entire length of the conference room between them is the only thing she is capable of doing that is honest. She looks at Trey, not with pity, not with concern, not with the love she performed in public and deployed in private as a tool of management, but with the specific, unfiltered expression of someone who has finally run out of reasons to keep up the act. The mask does not slip. It falls away entirely, with the clean, irreversible finality of something that was never going to hold. She points one manicured finger at the man on the floor, her voice dropping all of its practiced softness and becoming something sharp and carrying and impossible to misunderstand. She screams that she was deceived. She screams that Trey sold her a detailed, convincing fiction, private jets, luxury travel, boundless credit, a life designed at the level she was promised and genuinely believed she was purchasing when she signed the marriage certificate. She names every specific item of that promise with the escalating fury of someone reading back a contract they have discovered was fraudulent in every particular. She demands an immediate annulment. She declares herself a victim of marital fraud, which, given the specific circumstances of their arrangement, is not entirely inaccurate, and announces that she refuses to remain married to a criminal for another day, another hour, or another moment beyond the time required to legally undo what was done. Trey strains against the guard's grip, neck craning upward, eyes wide with the desperate, searching expression of a man who cannot quite accept that the last door has closed. He begs her to calm down. He invokes the marriage. He invokes the child they are expecting. He asks for loyalty, the loyalty he believed he had earned, the loyalty he assumed was a fixed feature of their arrangement regardless of what came to light about the terms on which the arrangement was built. That appeal for loyalty from a man whose relationship with loyalty has been entirely transactional is what finishes it. Madison looks at him for one long, final moment. And then she begins to tell him exactly what she thinks of him, and she does not stop for a very long time, and none of it is quiet, and all of it is in front of the glass walls where 35 people are watching, and none of it, for the first time in as long as I can remember observing my sister perform her life for other people, is a performance. Madison unleashed a devastating, vicious tirade that stripped away every last remaining shred of her dignity in real time, in front of witnesses, inside a glass box, with nowhere to hide. She paced the length of the glass wall in slow, furious strides, hurling classist and deeply racist insults directly into her husband's face with the practiced force of someone who has been storing these particular weapons for a very long time and has finally been given permission to use them. She screamed that she had lowered her social standing simply by agreeing to be publicly associated with him. She claimed, with the self-congratulatory tone of someone expecting gratitude for a sacrifice no one asked her to make, that she had generously and deliberately overlooked his background, his complete absence of generational wealth, and the color of his skin, solely because he had credibly promised her a multi-million-dollar lifestyle in return. She called him a street hustler playing dress-up in borrowed clothes. She told him he was nothing but a fraud who had infiltrated her wealthy, prestigious family by performing a version of success he had no means of sustaining. She shrieked that she had personally granted him legitimacy in elite corporate circles, opened doors for him, vouched for him, attached her name and her family's social capital to his fabricated persona, and that he had repaid that generosity by revealing himself to be a broke, parasitic con artist whose entire existence was a performance staged at other people's expense. She told him she was deeply, viscerally disgusted that she had ever allowed him near her, and that she would never, under any circumstances, permit her child to be raised in association with a federal convict who came from where he came from. Richard suddenly shot to his feet, raising both hands in the urgent, frantic gesture of a man trying to stop something moving too fast to be stopped. He begged Madison to stop saying such things, in this place, in front of these people, behind these glass walls where 35 employees could see every syllable of it written on her face, even if they could not hear the words themselves. Madison turned on him without breaking stride. She called our father a sloppy, incompetent idiot for getting caught. She blamed him, with the complete absence of self-reflection that has always defined her most catastrophic moments, for the totality of what had unfolded, arguing that if he had simply executed the illegal real estate transfer with the competence he had promised, none of them would be standing in this conference room, none of this would be happening, and her life would still be intact. His failure, she made clear, was the only variable that had actually mattered. The words were so violently hateful, so entirely and nakedly selfish, that they seemed to physically alter the atmosphere of the room, as if the sheer density of cruelty compressed into that small space had changed the quality of the air itself. Outside the transparent walls, my employees had gone completely still. Keyboards were silent. No one was pretending to look at their screens. They stood or sat motionless, watching the silent cinematic disaster unfolding inside the glass box at the center of their floor, faces carrying the specific expression of people witnessing something that will stay with them for a very long time. I turned my attention to my parents. Richard and Susan were standing as though someone had poured concrete around their feet. For 30 years, through every selfish outburst, every entitled demand, every moment of cruelty directed at anyone who got in her way, they had fiercely, consistently, unconditionally protected Madison. They had constructed elaborate justifications for her behavior, insisted she was simply sensitive and misunderstood, absorbed the social and financial costs of her worst moments, and presented to the world a version of their younger daughter that bore almost no resemblance to the person standing in this room right now. They had drained my college fund to shield her from consequences. They had alienated me systematically over decades. They had walked willingly into federal wire fraud because they needed to believe, that she was worth it. And now they were standing inside my glass conference room, listening to their perfect golden child deliver the most vile, venomous, nakedly racist tirade any of them had likely ever heard spoken aloud, and throwing even them under the bus in the process, without hesitation or apparent regret, simply to redirect the blame away from herself. The horror on my mother's face was not performed. It was not strategic. It was the profound, irreversible horror of a woman who had just been forced, for the first time in 3 decades, to see exactly and completely what she had built. Susan finally saw what she had raised, and there was no version of the story left that made it anything other than what it was. Zoe stood quietly beside me. She did not cry. She did not look away. She simply watched her father absorb the full, unobstructed reality of the woman he had chosen to place above his own daughter. Her expression carrying the particular stillness of someone who has known the truth for a very long time and is watching the rest of the room catch up. Trey had stopped fighting the guards. His body had gone entirely limp against the polished hardwood floor, every ounce of frantic, desperate energy draining out of his muscles simultaneously, like a tide going out. He lay there for a long, heavy moment with his cheek pressed to the cool wood, breathing steadily, staring at the expensive designer heels of the woman who was still screaming above him. Then something shifted in his face. Some internal structure that had been holding under enormous pressure for hours finally gave way. Not into despair, but into something darker and more considered. A low vibration started somewhere in his chest. It grew slowly, gathering resonance as it moved upward, until it emerged not as a scream or a sob, but as a laugh. Deep, hollow, and genuinely unsettling in the way of sounds that come from a place beyond caring. Madison stopped mid-sentence. The laugh unnerved her in a way that the arrest and the FBI receipt and the binder had not. She commanded him to stop. She demanded to know what he could possibly find amusing about the complete destruction of her future. Trey turned his head against the floor so he could look directly at her. His eyes were entirely flat, not angry, not hurt, not desperate. Simply empty, in the way of someone who has released every investment in a particular outcome and found the release almost comfortable. He spoke slowly. He made sure his voice carried clearly to every corner of the conference room. He said, "You want a divorce. Good luck paying half my debt, sweetheart. You signed the Limited Liability Company Operating Agreement." Limited Liability Company Operating Agreement. The words landed on Madison with the specific, targeted force of a piece of information delivered at exactly the right moment to cause maximum damage. Her eyes moved rapidly around the room as her mind processed the legal reality embedded in that sentence, with the frantic speed of someone running calculations they desperately need to come out differently than they are going to. When she married Trey, she had signed every corporate document he placed in front of her with the enthusiastic urgency of someone who wanted the title and the prestige and the business cards before the ink was dry. She had wanted to be a co-owner of a flashy technology startup. She had wanted the status. She had wanted to attend the launch events and speak casually at dinner parties about her stake in a rapidly scaling enterprise. That signature, the one she affixed eagerly, without reading a single line of what it contained, had legally bound her to $1.5 million of dangerous, unregulated creditor debt. It had connected her name and her financial identity directly to a federal wire fraud investigation that was already in motion and was not going to stop because she had decided she was done being married. She began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved. She pressed her back harder against the glass wall as if the building itself might absorb her if she pushed firmly enough. She looked down at Trey, who was still pinned to the floor, still smiling up at her with the cold, hollow satisfaction of a man who has lost everything and has decided that taking her with him is the only form of victory still available. He knew he was going to federal prison. He had known it since the moment I mentioned the FBI. But he had just confirmed, with 5 words and a corporate document she had been too impatient to read, that he was not going alone. Madison understood in that moment that the life she had constructed, the designer clothes, the country club lunches, the wealthy social identity, the entire expensive architecture of the existence she had purchased with her marriage was not simply damaged or temporarily disrupted. It was finished. Completely, permanently, and without any remaining avenue of appeal. In a state of pure, unhinged desperation, cornered from every direction, stripped of every available option, with nothing left to lose, and no leverage she had not already exhausted, Madison reached for her absolute final card. If she could not escape the financial ruin, she would destroy the last remaining piece of him that still had value to anyone, including himself. She stepped deliberately away from the glass wall. Her face had moved entirely beyond rage into something colder and more calculated. She looked down at her husband and laughed. Not the warm laugh of someone who has found something genuinely funny, but the high, hysterical sound of someone who has decided to burn the last thing standing. She told him he was not dragging her anywhere, because there was nothing left connecting them. She placed both hands over her stomach and looked directly into his empty eyes. She screamed that the baby was not his. The conference room went absolutely, completely silent. Not the quiet of people choosing not to speak, but the silence of a room in which every ordinary ambient sound has been simultaneously suspended. The particular silence that follows the detonation of something irreversible. Trey's smile disappeared from his bruised face in an instant, as completely as a light source being removed. Madison did not stop there. She had committed to the destruction and she intended to finish it. She announced, with the bright, reckless energy of someone who has passed through the far side of caring about consequences, that the child she was carrying belonged to her personal trainer, a 25-year-old fitness instructor she had been involved with for the previous 6 months, inside the apartment that Trey was paying for, on a schedule she had apparently managed with considerable logistical precision. She told Trey he was a blind, pathetic fool who had actually believed she would willingly compromise her body, her figure, and her carefully maintained physical appearance to carry his child. She told him he would receive nothing from her, no loyalty, no family, no infant to deploy as a bargaining chip in a court battle she was no longer going to participate in. The confession moved through the room like a physical force. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before. A short, choked, breathless gasp, as though the air had been removed from her lungs by something external. Her legs gave way beneath her with a completeness that suggested she had not made the decision to sit down. Her body had simply stopped supporting her upright. She collapsed into one of the leather executive chairs and buried her face in both trembling hands. The pristine, flawless, carefully protected image of her perfect younger daughter, the image she had sacrificed my college fund to preserve, had committed federal fraud to secure, had spent 30 years constructing and defending and excusing, shattered in front of her eyes with the clean, absolute finality of something that cannot be reassembled. Her beautiful daughter was not simply a person who had made some poor choices or fallen in with the wrong man. She was a remorseless, deliberate actor who had weaponized her own pregnancy to manipulate her parents into criminal activity, and had done it with the casual confidence of someone who had never once considered that there might be a version of events where it did not work. Richard stood completely motionless. He stared at Madison with the particular blankness of a man whose mental categorization system for the person in front of him has simply stopped functioning. For decades, he had organized his life around protecting her. He had structured his financial decisions, his relationship with me, his willingness to commit crimes, and his fundamental sense of purpose around ensuring that Madison never experienced consequences she did not choose to experience. He had forged a legal document 48 hours ago because he believed, completely and without reservation, that he was securing a wealthy and stable future for his precious grandchild. He had just learned he had destroyed his own life, his financial security, his freedom, and his marriage for a child that was not his grandchild at all. The golden child was not a person who had been worth protecting. She was a fiction, an elaborate, expensive, decades-long fiction, and he had paid for every page of it. Trey let his head drop back against the hardwood floor with a sound of pure, complete exhaustion. His eyes closed. The security guards loosened their grip slightly, not releasing him, but recognizing that the man beneath them had no physical resistance remaining. He had been fully and finally emptied out. Whatever had been keeping him functional through the fraud charges and the FBI receipt and the arrest and the guardianship petition and his pregnant wife's public tirade had run out entirely. He lay on my conference room floor with his eyes closed and his chest moving steadily and made no further sound. I stood at the head of the mahogany table and surveyed the full, complete landscape of what had happened inside this room over the past 45 minutes. They had come here this morning to intimidate me. They had come with a strategy, the booming paternal voice, the manufactured tears, the appeal to family obligation, the blank wire transfer form with the routing numbers already filled in, to force me to open my corporate accounts and bail them out of the consequences of their own deliberate choices. They had expected to find the version of me that used to exist, the dutiful, approval-seeking, pressure-sensitive daughter who would eventually capitulate simply to make the discomfort stop. Instead, they had walked into a glass box, and inside it, completely in public, with 35 witnesses on the other side of the transparent walls, they had annihilated each other with such comprehensive thoroughness that I had not needed to do a single additional thing. It was, by any objective measure, the most efficient and decisive crisis resolution of my entire professional career, and I had not raised my voice once. I raised my hands slowly and began to clap. The sound was measured, deliberate, and rhythmic, each soft impact of my palms echoing sharply in the acoustically sealed room like a metronome counting down to something final. It cut through the stunned silence with the precision of a scalpel. My parents flinched. Madison looked up from the floor. The slow, steady applause continued just long enough to ensure that every person in the room understood exactly what it meant. I offered them a single, cold, entirely apathetic smile. I said, "What a lovely family reunion. Now, all of you, get out of my building before I press charges for assault." The two security guards immediately and efficiently hauled Trey upright from the hardwood floor by his armpits, one on each side, with the practiced ease of men who had done this particular work before and found nothing surprising about it. He did not resist. He did not speak. He did not look at his pregnant wife, or at my stunned parents, or at the teenager standing quietly beside my chair. He simply allowed himself to be moved, his expensive leather shoes dragging slowly across the pristine carpet of the main office floor as the guards walked him through the heavy glass doors and out into the elevator lobby. What struck me most, in that particular moment, was that not a single member of my family turned their head to watch him leave. The man they had protected and defended and praised as a visionary technology genius, as recently as yesterday afternoon, was now, in the precise moment of his departure from this room, entirely irrelevant to them. He was a liability with no remaining utility. So they discarded him, not with drama or ceremony or even conscious decision, but with the thoughtless, reflexive ease of people dropping something they no longer need. Madison remained pressed against the far glass wall, staring at the floor with the fixed, unfocused gaze of someone whose internal systems have temporarily stopped processing incoming information. My parents turned their attention back to me. Completely, immediately, and without acknowledging my explicit instruction to leave, they redirected, the way they always have, the way they will likely always do, toward the possibility of another extraction. Susan pushed herself out of the leather executive chair with visible effort and moved toward my end of the mahogany table with the urgent, forward-leaning momentum of someone running out of time. She leaned her full weight against the polished wood edge, clasped her hands together in front of her in the posture of a person praying at an altar, and looked across the table at me with eyes that were, for the first time that morning, genuinely afraid. The manufactured tears were entirely gone. What had replaced them was real. The wet, raw, unglamorous panic of a woman who has finally, completely run out of script. She begged me to listen. She choked on the words slightly as they came out, which was the most honest thing she had done in my presence in years. She described Madison's situation: broke, legally entangled, heavily pregnant, with creditors who would seize the luxury apartment by the end of the week, and arrived, with the breathtaking directness of someone who has abandoned all pretense of strategy, at the specific request she had been building toward. She asked me to let Madison move into my $2.5 million estate immediately. Richard stepped up beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, his previous booming authority reduced to a low, trembling register that I had never heard from him before. He pointed out that the house had 6 empty bedrooms. He said Madison needed a quiet, safe environment for the health of her unborn child. And then, in what I can only characterize as a display of delusion so vast and so complete that it almost deserves a form of respect for its sheer, unself-conscious boldness, he suggested that having Madison live under my roof would represent a wonderful opportunity for the two of us to finally reconnect and begin the long-overdue process of healing our relationship as sisters. He promised that Madison would behave impeccably. He promised they would contribute to her daily expenses. He called it my final chance to save the family from total public ruin, as though the public ruin were something that had happened to them, rather than something they had constructed, brick by brick, with full awareness and deliberate intention. They were standing inside my corporate headquarters. They were fully, specifically aware that my father had forged my legal signature in an attempt to steal my estate. And they were asking me, directly and without apparent irony, to hand over the keys to that same estate. I looked at the two of them for a long, quiet moment. I genuinely marveled, the way one marvels at something natural and extreme, like a storm system or a geological formation, at the bottomless, self-renewing depths of their entitlement and their capacity for delusion. There is something almost impressive about the ability to stand in the wreckage of your own making and still believe that the person you tried to destroy owes you a rescue. I did not raise my voice. I did not express anger or sorrow or the long, complicated grief that lives somewhere beneath both of those things. I simply leaned forward and placed my forearms flat on the mahogany surface. I told them that my house is my personal fortress, purchased entirely and exclusively with my own labor, my own discipline, and my own decade of relentless work. Not theirs, not anyone else's, mine. I reminded them, with deliberate, unhurried precision, of the 3-minute video I had watched 48 hours ago in my kitchen, while $25,000 worth of food was being loaded onto refrigerated trucks outside my window. And then I recited Madison's exact words back to them. Not a paraphrase, not a summary. The specific, precise language she had used while sitting in a dimly lit apartment with a glass of wine, laughing. I said, "Why would you ever want your perfect golden child living with a barren, unlovable ATM?" I reminded them that both of them had been present in that room. Both of them had heard those words and laughed. Both of them had then driven to my house the following afternoon, expecting to stand on the property she had described in those terms and claim it for themselves. I told Susan that Madison had made her bed, thoughtfully, deliberately, and with full knowledge of what she was doing, alongside a fraudulent con artist. She was going to sleep in it. I denied their request. I told them to find a local shelter if they required a free place to stay. I reached for the phone console on my desk to contact police dispatch and arrange a formal, assisted departure. My mother saw my hand moving toward the console and came completely apart. The crushing, cascading panic, the specific terror of a woman who has just processed the full, irreversible reality of the situation she is in, shattered her capacity to maintain any further control over what came out of her mouth. She grabbed my father by the lapels of his dark suit jacket with both hands, her grip white-knuckled and fierce, and shook him with a force that was startling in someone of her size. She screamed, not the calculated performative tears she had wielded earlier, but the raw, fracturing scream of genuine despair, that if I did not take them in, they would lose everything. She screamed Richard's name. She ordered him to tell me what he had done. Susan's scream hung in the conditioned air of the glass-enclosed room. Richard did not shout back. He did not try to recover his authority or reassert control of the narrative. He did not attempt to manage the situation the way he had managed situations my entire childhood, through volume, through presence, through the specific quality of certainty that had always functioned as a substitute for actual reasoning. Instead, the tall, imposing man who had commanded our family with iron-fisted authority for the full length of my conscious memory simply deflated. His broad shoulders dropped forward. His hands began shaking at his sides with the fine, continuous tremor of someone whose body has finally registered what his mind has been refusing. He looked down at the mahogany table. Not at me, not at his wife, not at Madison still standing frozen against the far wall. And for the first time in 33 years, he looked genuinely, profoundly small. He swallowed. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a rasping whisper. The voice of someone who has run completely out of the performance and is left with only whatever is real underneath it. He told me to think back 8 months. He reminded me of the evening Trey had invited the family to an expensive downtown steakhouse. Ostensibly a celebration, actually an extended pitch for early investment capital in his cryptocurrency platform. Trey had asked me directly, that night, to come in as an angel investor. He had presented a business plan that was designed to look sophisticated from a distance and fall apart under close examination. I had examined it closely, recognized the Ponzi mechanics embedded in its structure within approximately 15 minutes, and declined without a moment of hesitation. I had warned my parents before we left the restaurant not to get involved with him financially. I had been specific and direct about what I had seen in the numbers. Richard had interpreted my professional assessment as a personal attack. He had heard my refusal as a judgment on his taste, on his judgment, on the son-in-law he had enthusiastically endorsed, on the financial future he had constructed for Madison in his imagination. He had wanted, with the specific hunger of a man whose pride has been publicly questioned, to prove me wrong. He kept his eyes fixed on the grain of the mahogany wood as he confessed. He explained that after I walked away from the dinner, Trey had pulled him aside and applied the precise lever he knew would work. He told my father that a personal seed investment would make him a silent partner, that when the company went public, when the platform launched and scaled and made its early backers extraordinarily wealthy, Richard would be among them. He painted a picture of vindication and prosperity, and the particular satisfaction of watching the daughter who had doubted him eventually understand that he had been right all along. My father had believed him. He had believed him not because the business plan was convincing on its merits, but because he needed it to be true. Because Madison's happiness, Madison's lifestyle, and Madison's validation of the choice he had made when he decided she was the one worth protecting, all of that required Trey to be what he claimed to be. And because he did not have $500,000 in liquid cash, because no one had ever asked him to produce that kind of money before, and the question of where it would come from had never been a practical one, He had gone to the bank. Without consulting Susan, without speaking to a financial advisor, without telling anyone. He had taken out a high-interest second mortgage on the family home. The house they had paid off completely over 30 years. The house they had lived in since I was small. The house that represented the entire physical accumulation of their financial life together. He had signed away the equity they had spent 3 decades building and wired $500,000 directly into Trey's fraudulent corporate account. Susan's gasp when the full sentence reached her. The gasp of a woman who has just learned that the foundation of her physical security was removed without her knowledge, was a sound I have never heard before and will not forget. She stumbled backward slightly, one hand going to her chest, her face carrying the specific expression of someone being told that the ground they are standing on is not where they thought it was. Madison stopped leaning against the glass wall. She stared at our father with wide, genuinely shocked eyes, and I watched, in real time, the specific moment when she understood that the designer bags and the Porsche lease payments and the luxury restaurant dinners and the 1,000 small expensive details of the life she had been living had been funded, in significant part, by money quietly taken from her own parents' retirement. Richard finally looked up from the wood grain. His face was pale, covered in the particular sheen of cold perspiration that accompanies the relief of a confession that has been held too long and the terror of what that confession is about to cost. He explained the financial reality they were currently facing with the flat, depleted candor of someone who has exhausted every available alternative to honesty. He had been struggling for 3 months to make the payments on the second mortgage. Payments that Trey had promised to cover through dividend returns that had not materialized, because Trey's operation was structured to take money in rather than pay it out. He had been holding out, month after month, for the grand acquisition announcement yesterday, which was supposed to generate the emergency investment capital that would have allowed Trey to resume the dividend payments and allow Richard to resume the mortgage payments, and allow the entire precarious architecture of the arrangement to survive a little longer. That hope was dead. I had made certain of it at 8 o'clock that morning. With Trey's assets frozen by the federal investigation I had triggered, every account and shell company and financial instrument associated with him had been simultaneously locked. Richard's access to the promised returns that had never been real, flowing through channels that had never been legitimate, was permanently severed. The bank holding the second mortgage had been absorbing delinquent payments and broken promises for 3 consecutive months. They had run out of patience. The formal foreclosure process had been initiated. The house, my parents' house, the house I had grown up in, the house that Richard had leveraged without telling anyone, was going to be taken. They were not facing embarrassment or inconvenience, or a temporary setback that a transfer of funds could resolve. They were facing the complete and final loss of every physical, financial, and social structure they had built over the preceding 3 decades. Richard reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket with a visibly trembling hand and produced a single folded piece of paper. He smoothed it against the mahogany surface with the careful, deliberate movements of someone buying time for courage they are not certain they have. He pushed it slowly across the table toward me. It was a blank Priority Bank wire transfer authorization form. His receiving account details were already filled in, printed neatly at the top. The amount written on the bottom line was $600,000. Richard looked up at me. The arrogant patriarch. The man who had spent 33 years using his size, his voice, and his iron certainty to command compliance from everyone in his household, was completely and entirely gone. What remained was a desperate, frightened old man asking for his life with his eyes because he had run out of the language to ask for it any other way. He pointed a shaking finger at the paper. His voice cracked when the words finally came. He said, "I need $600,000 today. Or your mother and I are homeless." I looked down at the wire transfer form resting on the polished mahogany table. The crisp white paper seemed almost to mock the devastation happening around it. So clean, so orderly, so precisely formatted, while everything else in the room was in various stages of irreversible collapse. I read the routing numbers. I read the sum, $600,000, printed in neat, hopeful numerals at the bottom of the page. My father had already filled in his receiving account details. All the document required was my signature. Susan was holding her breath. I could see her chest, the shallow, rapid rise and fall of someone who has stopped actually breathing and is only performing the motion. Richard was watching my hands with the unguarded, pathetic intensity of a man who has no remaining capacity for disguising what he needs. He actually believed, despite the forgery, despite the fraud, despite the decades of deliberate exploitation, despite every single specific thing that had happened in this building over the past hour, that I would pick up a pen and save him. I reached across the table and picked up my custom-engraved executive pen. My mother released a tiny, audible sound, the involuntary exhale of relief so immediate and so genuine that she could not contain it. Madison looked up from the floor, a small, fragile spark of something, not quite hope, but the preliminary tremor of it, moved across her face for the first time in 40 minutes. They thought the dutiful daughter had returned. They thought that watching my hand move toward a pen meant the version of me they had always been able to manage was still available somewhere beneath the surface of everything that had happened. I held the pen between my fingers and felt its solid, familiar weight. Then, with a sudden and deliberate twist of both wrists, I snapped it cleanly in half. Black ink exploded across the surface of the crisp white wire transfer form, spreading in dark, irregular patterns through the carefully printed routing numbers and account details, and the $600,000 figure on the bottom line, making the document not simply unsigned, but physically, irreversibly destroyed. I dropped the two broken halves directly onto what remained of the signature line. The sharp crack of the pen breaking echoed in the enclosed room with the specific clarity of something final. Susan flinched backward as though the sound had been directed at her physically. She covered her mouth with one hand. Richard stared at the ink-stained form in front of him with the particular quality of disbelief that comes not from surprise, but from the slow, comprehensive collapse of the last available version of the story. I leaned back in my leather executive chair, folded my arms across my chest, and delivered my verdict. I told him I was not signing anything. I told him he would not receive a single dollar from my personal accounts, and he would not touch a fraction of a cent from my corporate firm. My father opened his mouth. His face had shifted to a pale, sickly gray, the color of someone experiencing a reckoning that their body is processing faster than their mind. I raised one hand and he stopped. I told him to stop performing the role of victim and start listening to the actual, unvarnished legal reality of the situation he had constructed for himself with full knowledge and deliberate choice. I reminded him that I am a professional crisis manager. I deal with corporate fraud, federal investigations, and the cascading financial catastrophes that follow from both of those things on a daily basis. I understand, with specific and detailed precision, how the federal government operates when it uncovers a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme and the network of people who enabled it. I looked directly into my father's terrified eyes and laid out the legal landscape he was currently standing in. I explained that he had not simply given Trey a personal cash gift that could be characterized as a family loan. He had taken out a formally documented second mortgage on a paid-off residential property and wired $500,000 into a fraudulent corporate shell company, a transaction with a complete paper trail, fully visible to federal investigators, already flagged, already being traced. And beyond that, far beyond that, He had physically handed a forged guarantor document bearing my name to two sworn law enforcement officers on a residential driveway the previous afternoon. That single action had moved him from the category of deceived investor into the category of active accomplice in a federal criminal enterprise. The distinction was not a matter of interpretation, it was a matter of law. I told him that the FBI was already tracing every dollar that had moved in or out of Trey's accounts. His financial profile was compromised, his bank accounts were flagged. Every transaction associated with his name was under scrutiny. I lowered my voice to a quiet, precise register. I told Richard that if I wired $600,000 into his personal account today, the federal authorities monitoring those accounts would freeze the transaction within hours. They would classify the transfer as an attempt to shelter a co-conspirator or launder funds connected to an active investigation. That characterization would extend the investigation to my corporate entity, my business license, my firm's financial records, and potentially my own legal exposure. I told him that sending him that money would not save him. It would simply add me to the list of people the government was building a case against. I looked at both of them. My mother, still trembling and unable to meet my eyes, and my father, staring at the ruined wire transfer form with the expression of a dead man who has not yet been informed of his status. I told them what they had done. I told them that they had built their entire lives around protecting and enabling a person who had spent those same years treating the people around her as resources to be used and discarded. They had allowed her to steal my college fund. They had allowed her to redirect my housewarming into a platform for her own announcement. They had willingly committed federal fraud because they had invested so much, across so many years, in believing that their younger daughter's comfort and lifestyle were worth whatever it cost. They had traded their morality, their financial security, their relationship with me, and ultimately their freedom, for an illusion. And the illusion had taken everything it was given and provided nothing durable in return. I looked at my mother, still pressing her hands against her face, unable to look at anything in the room. Then I looked at my father, at the broken pen and the ink-bleeding paper in front of him, and I delivered the final verdict in the plainest, most direct language I know. I said, "You bet your house on the golden child. You lost. Pay the debt." Richard stared at the broken pen and the dark, spreading stain of ink soaking through the wire transfer form. His chest stopped its regular movement for a moment. He looked like a man receiving a diagnosis he had known was coming and had not, despite knowing, managed to prepare for. Susan let out a soft, continuous sound. Not a scream, not a sob, but something quieter and more absolute, and buried her face deeper into her hands as the full weight of their homelessness settled permanently over her. Madison stayed frozen against the glass wall, her eyes wide, entirely mute now that her last financial lifeline had been severed in front of her. They thought the punishment was finished. They thought the worst I was capable of was refusing the money and allowing the bank to proceed with the foreclosure. They had badly, consistently, and fundamentally underestimated the lengths I will go to when it comes to protecting the corporate empire I built from absolutely nothing. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and produced one final piece of paper. Not a spreadsheet. Not a bank statement. Not a forensic accounting report. A thick, official municipal document with a crisp, bright blue government seal stamped clearly across its upper portion. I did not slide this one across the table. I stood up from my leather executive chair, walked around the full length of the mahogany table, and positioned myself directly in front of my father. I waited until he slowly raised his head, until his eyes, red-rimmed and completely emptied of the pride that had defined them my entire life, found mine. Then I held the document up so he could read the bold black letters printed across the top. I explained to him, that when he decided to forge my signature the previous afternoon, he had made a specific and catastrophic miscalculation. He had not simply forged the name of his daughter. He had forged the signature of the chief executive officer of a registered, licensed, publicly operating crisis management firm, and he had attached my corporate limited liability company as a named guarantor to a fraudulent financial instrument. In the eyes of the law, that is not a family dispute or a domestic misunderstanding or a moral failing. That is corporate identity theft and felony fraud, committed against a business entity, with full documentation. I told him the cold, practical reality of my professional position. As a woman whose firm manages the public relations and legal crises of Fortune 500 companies, my personal and professional integrity must be not just good, but unimpeachable. My clients retain me because they trust that my name, my firm's name, and my corporate identity are beyond reproach. The moment a forged document bearing my company's signature is discovered, whether by my attorneys, by a counterparty, or by a federal investigator, I have a legal obligation to report it immediately, choosing to conceal it, to manage it quietly, to absorb it into the category of family difficulties, and hope no one looks too closely, would make me legally complicit in the crime. It would subject my firm to the same federal investigation currently dismantling Trey. It would void my business licenses, destroy my professional reputation, and potentially cost me the freedom I had spent a decade working to secure. I told my father that I would not burn down my entire life's work to protect a man who had willingly and knowingly handed me over to the wolves. I dropped the document into his lap. I told him to read the filing date and the timestamp stamped in the lower right corner. It was a formal criminal complaint, a police report. I explained that I had not only delivered the black binder to the FBI field office that morning. I had also walked directly into the downtown precinct at 8:30 a.m. and filed a comprehensive criminal complaint for forgery, fraud, and corporate identity theft against my own father. I was officially pressing charges. The words detonated in the glass room. Susan lurched forward with a speed that surprised me, lunging toward the table and reaching both hands out with the desperate, grasping motion of someone trying to physically intercept words already spoken. She screamed my name. She begged me to tell her it was a cruel joke. She cried that he was my father, that he was an old man, that he would not survive a single day in a federal correctional facility. Richard did not scream. He simply stared down at the blue municipal seal resting in his lap. His hands, wrapped around the edges of the document, were shaking with a fine, continuous tremor that had been present since his confession and had not stopped since. He looked up at me slowly, and in his eyes there was no anger remaining, only a hollow, terrifying emptiness and the specific expression of a man who has finally, completely understood that the person he is looking at is entirely serious. I took a careful step back from him, straightened my posture, and kept my expression entirely clear of anything that might be interpreted as hesitation. I told Susan that he should have considered his age and his capacity for survival before committing a felony to fund the lifestyle of a daughter who had just publicly announced, in front of 35 witnesses, that she had spent the past 6 months deceiving him in every possible direction simultaneously. I told them both that the choices they had made carry natural, unavoidable consequences. Today was the day the accounting came due. Before Susan could find the words for another plea, a sharp, piercing sound cut through the acoustic insulation of the conference room glass from the street below. It started as a distant wail, the particular frequency of emergency vehicles moving at speed through urban traffic. It grew rapidly, resolving into the unmistakable sound of multiple police sirens filling the downtown air outside my floor-to-ceiling windows. I turned toward the glass. Multiple police cruisers and a pair of unmarked federal vehicles were pulling aggressively into the main entrance of my building. their red and blue lights pulsing against the glass facade of the lobby doors with a regularity that suggested this was not a coincidence or a response to something unrelated. I turned back to my father. I told him that the officers pulling up to the building were not downstairs exclusively for Trey. They were coming up the elevator right now to arrest him for forgery. Before my father could fully process the sentence, the heavy glass doors of the conference room were pushed open from the outside. The officers did not knock. They did not announce themselves or wait for acknowledgement. Two uniformed city officers stepped through the doorway, followed closely by two federal agents in dark windbreakers who moved with the particular contained efficiency of people who have done this specific kind of work many times. Through the transparent walls, I could see the remainder of the response team spreading across the main lobby, and I could see, at the reception desk, one of my security guards with Trey already positioned against the counter's edge, a federal agent beside him reading aloud from a standard card, the sound of the Miranda rights carrying faintly through the glass. The formal recitation of Trey's constitutional rights echoed across the open floor of my office, heard by every one of my 35 employees, absorbed into the institutional memory of the building, finalizing, in the most official language available, the absolute and complete conclusion of his constructed persona. But the two officers inside the conference room were not looking at the reception desk. They walked directly toward the mahogany table. The lead officer looked at my father and asked him to confirm his identity. Richard could not produce a word. He gave a single, slow, trembling nod. The officer instructed him to turn around and place his hands behind his back. Susan lost what remained of her composure entirely. She lunged from her chair and grabbed the sleeve of the lead officer's dark blue uniform with both hands, pulling at the fabric with the frantic urgency of someone trying to stop something moving with the indifferent momentum of institutional authority. She screamed that there had been a terrible misunderstanding. She said her husband was a good man who had only been trying to protect his family. She begged the officer to look at the paperwork again, to give it another few minutes, to please just stop. The second officer stepped smoothly in, placed a firm hand on my mother's shoulder, and informed her in a clear, carrying voice that she was to step back immediately or face a charge of interfering with a lawful arrest. Susan recoiled. She pressed both hands over her mouth and sobbed. Not the managed, strategic tears she had employed earlier in this room, but the genuine, gasping, uncontrolled weeping of a woman whose entire world is collapsing simultaneously in multiple directions, and who has no remaining mechanisms for managing the experience. Richard offered no resistance whatsoever. He turned around with the complete final compliance of a man who has accepted an outcome rather than surrendering to one. His broad shoulders, which had carried 30 years of paternal authority, were entirely slack. He placed his hands behind his back without being physically guided and waited. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists was the clearest sound in the room. Crisp. Definitive. Final. It was the sound of 3 decades of arrogant, self-justifying patriarchy being snapped in half by a mechanism that weighs approximately 8 ounces and does not care about anyone's reasons. The officer began reading him his rights with the standard, efficient cadence of someone reciting a text they have memorized through repetition. Felony forgery, corporate fraud, the specific charges enumerated in the complaint I had filed at 8:30 that morning. Richard looked over his shoulder at me one last time as the officer's voice continued behind him. There was no anger left in his expression, the burning, righteous fury that had filled that face my entire childhood. The fury I had learned to navigate around and accommodate and suppress my own reactions to avoid triggering was completely gone. What remained was a hollow, frightened emptiness. The expression of a man who had expected, even at this moment, that something would intervene, that I would step forward. That some version of the daughter he thought he had raised would materialize and make a call and tell the officers there had been a misunderstanding. I did not move a single muscle. I turned my back to the arrest. I walked to the side credenza, picked up a clean porcelain cup, and pressed the button on the espresso machine. I watched the dark shot descend into the cup with the quiet, focused attention of someone doing an ordinary thing on an ordinary morning. I lifted the cup, turned around, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The warm, bitter liquid was exactly right. I held the cup at a comfortable angle and watched, with complete and calibrated apathy, as the officers firmly took my father by each arm and walked him through the heavy glass doors and out of the conference room for the last time. Susan stumbled close behind them, wailing audibly, her designer purse swinging irregularly against her hip as she moved through the open office floor toward the elevator lobby. My employees watched in absolute, sustained silence as the two people who had arrived 2 hours ago to intimidate me were escorted past their workstations by uniformed law enforcement and disappeared into the elevator. Within 3 minutes, the lobby was clear. The sounds faded. The elevator indicator returned to ground level. The heavy acoustic doors of the conference room hissed shut, and a sudden, deep quiet settled over the space. The particular quiet of a room from which something large and loud and long present has finally been completely removed. Zoe stood near the window, her school backpack still on one shoulder, her posture relaxed in a way I had never once seen when she was in proximity to her father or her stepmother. She watched me with wide, calm eyes, but we were not quite finished. Madison was still in the far corner of the glass room. She stood absolutely motionless as the full cascading reality of her situation pressed in on her from every direction simultaneously. Her husband was in the elevator headed to a federal holding facility. Her father was in handcuffs facing serious felony charges and the imminent court-ordered seizure of the family home. Her mother was somewhere below on the sidewalk, in a state that rendered her functionally useless as any kind of support structure. And Madison herself was standing here, wearing a heavy silk maternity gown she could no longer afford, carrying a child that belonged to a man who had since changed his phone number, legally bound to $1.5 million of criminal debt she had signed herself into with enthusiastic haste, with no money, no functioning credit cards, no transportation, and absolutely nowhere to go. She looked at the empty chairs around the mahogany table. She looked at the broken pen. She looked at the ink-stained wire transfer form lying where I had dropped it. Then she looked at me. The arrogant, untouchable golden child, the person who had spent her entire life elevated slightly above consequence by the combined efforts of two people who should have known better, was completely, entirely gone. What remained was something I recognized as genuine, and it was the most honest I had ever seen her. Her knees buckled. Madison dropped to the hardwood floor. Not gracefully, not strategically, not with the practiced collapse of someone performing distress, but with the heavy, unglamorous impact of someone whose legs have simply stopped working. She did not arrange herself for effect. She did not cover her face or try to compose her expression into something more appealing. Real tears, the ugly, uncontrolled kind that ruin expensive makeup and make no effort to be attractive, streamed down her cheeks and dripped onto the polished wood. She pressed her hands together in front of her and looked up at me from her knees. She begged me not to put her on the street. Her voice cracked in a way I had never heard it crack before, not with the manufactured fragility she had spent years perfecting, but with the actual, unprotected sound of genuine fear. She asked for a job. She said she would do anything. She said she would work reception. She said she would answer phones and file paperwork and do whatever the lowest available position in my building required of her. I looked down at her. Madison, the untouchable one, the chosen one. The sister who had spent the full length of our shared history using my neck as a stepping stone toward whatever she wanted next, was kneeling on my conference room floor with mascara tracking down both cheeks, and her designer maternity gown pooled around her in a spreading circle of silk. She believed that performing submission, that physically lowering herself and asking for minimum wage employment in my lobby, would constitute sufficient evidence that she had learned something meaningful from the events of the past 48 hours. I stepped back, creating a deliberate physical distance between us. I told her that she would never work in this building. I told her that my firm is a highly secured, elite corporate crisis operation, and that I do not hire liabilities, thieves, co-conspirators to federal fraud, or people who have spent years perfecting the art of abusing a 16-year-old girl for the color of her skin. I told her that I wanted her to understand, clearly, specifically, and without any remaining ambiguity, what the next 10 years of her life were actually going to look like. I did not raise my voice. I kept my register low and even and precise, the way I do when I am briefing a client about a situation that is bad and is not going to improve. I told her that her luxurious life was officially over. I explained that because she had signed Trey's corporate operating agreements with the enthusiastic speed of someone more interested in the title than the terms, his private creditors now had a legal claim against her directly. They were coming for her personally, not as Trey's wife, but as a named co-owner of a fraudulent corporate entity. I told her she would be hauled into federal bankruptcy court. Every piece of jewelry, every designer handbag, every asset she believed she owned, every physical object she had used to signal her status to the world, would be seized and liquidated to service a debt she had signed herself into without reading a single sentence of what she was agreeing to. I told her that if she ever found a basic hourly position somewhere, her wages would be garnished by the IRS and by debt collectors before the direct deposit cleared her account. And then I told her about her social world, because I knew, with the specific knowledge of someone who grew up watching her operate, that her social standing was the thing she valued more than any of the rest of it. I told her that the women she spent her afternoons with at the country club, the ones she gossiped with over expensive lunches and competed with over school enrollment and charity committee positions, were already deleting her contact information from their phones. In the specific insular ecology of elite social circles, financial fraud is not a misfortune that invites sympathy. It is a contagion. And Madison was patient zero. She would be shunned permanently. Not gradually, not with the occasional awkward social encounter that eventually fades, but absolutely, completely, and without appeal. She would become the cautionary tale they referenced over meals she could no longer afford to attend, at events she was no longer invited to, in a world that had quietly and efficiently closed its doors against her. She was going to be a broke single mother raising a child whose father had relocated out of state and changed his number, living in the long shadow of wealth she used to display as evidence of her superiority, with no one left who was obligated to help her and no mechanism remaining for accessing anyone who might choose to. Madison sobbed harder, pressing both hands over her face as the specific, detailed reality of her new existence moved through her. Not as abstract consequence, but as concrete, lived-in future. She knew I was right. There was no exit left. There was no version of this where someone swooped in and restored what was gone, because what was gone had never been entirely real. I walked to the communication console on the side credenza and pressed the call button for front desk security. 2 uniformed guards appeared through the heavy glass doors within 30 seconds. They assess the situation with the practiced, unhurried competence of people who are paid to respond to whatever they find. They looked at the weeping woman on the floor and then looked at me for instructions. I pointed at Madison. I told them to escort her out of the building and permanently revoke her visitor access from the security system. I told them that if she appeared in the lobby at any point in the future, they were to call the police immediately and request assistance with a criminal trespass. Madison did not fight them. When the guards grasped her arms gently and brought her to her feet, Everything went out of her at once: the drama, the performance, the calculation, the anger, the carefully maintained presentation of a person who is going to be fine. She hung her head, let her shoulders drop, and allowed them to walk her toward the door. She did not look back at me. She dragged the expensive heels of her designer shoes across the carpet of the main office floor, following the exact path her husband and her parents had taken before her, and disappeared through the lobby doors. I stood in the center of the quiet conference room and listened to the heavy glass doors hiss shut for the final time. The toxic, suffocating, decades-long presence of my family, in all its entitled, manipulative, damaging weight, was gone. I had not destroyed them. They had destroyed themselves, with the tools they had spent years sharpening, in a room I had deliberately chosen for the quality of its transparency. I had simply made sure they could not do it in the dark. I turned and looked at Zoe. She was standing near the window, 16 years old, school backpack on her shoulder, the afternoon light falling across her face at an angle that made her look remarkably composed for someone who had just watched her entire family structure collapse in the span of a single morning. She was watching me with wide, quiet, respectful eyes that held none of the fear I had learned to read in her expression whenever her father or Madison were in the room. I offered her a soft, genuine smile. The first one I had produced in approximately 48 hours that was not strategic or cold or designed to communicate something precise. I told her it was time to go back to my office and order some lunch. We walked out of the conference room together, leaving the broken pen and the ink-stained paper and the empty chairs behind us, the detritus of a crisis that had been managed, documented, and permanently resolved. 3 months later. The federal justice system moves at its own pace, deliberate, thorough, and entirely indifferent to the personal timelines of the people it is processing. But when it arrives completely. Trey did not contest the charges. Once the FBI's forensic accounting team had worked through the material in my black binder and cross-referenced it against Trey's financial records, transaction histories, and the paper trail connecting his operation to every investor who had ever given him money, there was nothing left for a defense attorney to build a case around. The evidence was not circumstantial. It was comprehensive and precisely documented. Facing the mathematical certainty of a 20-year sentence if he took the case to trial, Trey accepted a plea agreement. He was formally sentenced to 5 years in a federal correctional institution, followed by 10 years of heavily supervised financial probation that would monitor every transaction he made for the following decade. There were no cameras at the sentencing, no loyal colleagues or former investors sitting in the gallery, no headline-generating press conference afterward. He was processed through the system with the quiet, institutional efficiency reserved for people who have stopped being interesting to anyone who matters, and transported to a federal facility in a standard-issue uniform. The tech executive persona, the tailored suits, the leased Porsche, the VIP investor dinners, the compelling pitch delivered with the confidence of someone who believed he could talk his way through any room, was simply gone. He had been replaced by a case number and a 5-year sentence, and the corporate world he had spent years trying to infiltrate had already moved on without noting his departure. My father's outcome was different in its specific form, but equivalent in its essential character. Richard avoided a federal prison sentence because of his age and his complete absence of any prior criminal record. 2 factors the sentencing judge weighed in his favor with the measured, reluctant mercy of someone providing the minimum that the law and conscience together required. He was sentenced to 5 years of strictly supervised probation, with mandatory reporting requirements and substantial restrictions on his financial activities. The financial penalties were a different matter entirely. The court ordered comprehensive restitution fines that reflected both his active role in the wire fraud and the specific crime of handing forged documents to sworn law enforcement officers. Those penalties consumed whatever remained in his accounts after the federal asset review. He was formally declared bankrupt by the state. The bank proceeded with the foreclosure on the family home with the kind of systematic, unhurried corporate efficiency that does not negotiate and does not grant extensions beyond what the paperwork requires. The house, the one with the pale blue bedrooms and the manicured front lawn, the one where I had learned to read and had my college fund stolen and had spent 18 years navigating the specific dynamics of a household built on conditional love, was seized and sold at a public county auction for a fraction of its assessed value. The timeline between the foreclosure notice and the auction was swift. The timeline between the auction and the mandatory vacate notice was 14 days. My parents could not afford professional movers. They packed 30 years of accumulated life into cheap black plastic garbage bags and loaded them into a rented truck by themselves. The country club socialite and the imposing patriarch, side by side in the driveway, performing the work of people they had spent decades looking down at. Their credit was destroyed. Their assets were gone. The social network they had built over decades in an affluent suburban community, the dinner parties, the club memberships, the carefully maintained relationships with the right families, had evaporated with their financial standing, because that network had never been built on anything more durable than the appearance of success. They could not lease an apartment anywhere near the city they had lived in. They crossed state lines and rented a small, aluminum-sided mobile home in a trailer park located adjacent to a noisy interstate highway, the kind of place that exists in the background of other people's lives, visible briefly from car windows, and quickly forgotten. Susan, who had spent decades cultivating the particular gracious condescension of a woman who considered herself several rungs above the working class, now spends her days standing on aching feet behind a grocery store checkout lane in a cheap polyester uniform, bagging other people's purchases for a wage that barely covers the electric bill in their rented trailer. Richard, at 65, works the graveyard shift as a night security guard at an industrial scrapyard, patrolling a chain-link perimeter in the dark with a flashlight, earning an hourly wage that was never part of any retirement scenario he imagined for himself, in a role that requires exactly none of the authority and dominance that defined his sense of self for the better part of his life. But the most complete and most resonant form of justice, the kind that has the specific quality of a story resolving into its natural shape, belonged to Madison. Shortly after the conference room implosion, Madison gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The personal trainer, upon learning that the wealthy divorced socialite he had been involved with had been replaced overnight by a broke, legally compromised woman with a mountain of fraudulent debt and no functioning credit cards, packed his belongings, changed his phone number, blocked her on every available platform, and relocated to another state. The speed and completeness of his disappearance suggested he had prepared the exit before it became necessary. Madison was left with an infant, no money, no credit, no apartment. The creditors had indeed seized it within the week, exactly as I had described, and nowhere to go except the mobile home where her exhausted, bitter parents were already struggling to make the utility payments on a security guard's graveyard shift wages. She moved in with them. The three of them are now confined to a small, poorly insulated space next to a highway. Madison and her infant in one room, my parents in the other, sealed together in a pressure cooker of mutual resentment and shared catastrophe that shows no signs of relieving itself. Richard blames Madison for his bankruptcy. Susan blames Richard for the mortgage. Madison blames both of them for failing to protect the life she believed she was owed. The infant cries through the night, and the highway traffic roars through the walls in the early hours, and none of them have any remaining mechanism for escaping the environment they collectively created. Meanwhile, I am sitting at the massive marble kitchen island in my $2.5 million estate on a crisp autumn morning, bathed in the warm golden light that pours through floor-to-ceiling windows onto a surface I have never once had to share with anyone who did not deserve to be there. The silence in this house is not the silence of isolation. It is not the silence of a woman who built a fortress and sealed herself inside it. It is the specific, particular, deeply earned silence of a life that has been cleared of everything that was draining it. And what remains in that silence, now that the noise is gone, is something I am only beginning to fully understand. Light footsteps descend the grand hardwood staircase with the easy, unhurried rhythm of someone who feels safe in the space they are moving through. Zoe walks into the kitchen wearing the crisp navy blazer and plaid skirt of her elite private school. She drops her backpack onto a bar stool with the comfortable, proprietary ease of someone who lives here, which she does, legally and permanently, and by choice. She opens the stainless steel refrigerator and retrieves a bottle of sparkling water with the offhand familiarity of someone accessing their own home. The transformation in her over the past 3 months has been the kind that is difficult to describe without sounding like you are exaggerating, because the change is not subtle. The defensive posture, the particular way she used to carry her shoulders and position her eyes when her father or Madison were within a certain radius, is entirely gone. Her shoulders are relaxed. Her eyes are bright and specific and present in the way of someone who is not constantly allocating a portion of their attention to monitoring the room for threats. Getting her out of that apartment was the best decision I have made in my professional or personal life in recent memory. Within the first 2 weeks, I enrolled her in twice-weekly sessions with a highly regarded adolescent psychologist who specializes in the specific intersection of racial trauma and family-based psychological abuse. The work she has done in those sessions, which she approaches with the same focused seriousness she brings to her coursework, has produced changes that are visible and sustained. She is sleeping through the night. She is eating regular meals. She has opinions about things that have nothing to do with survival. Academically, she has exceeded every expectation. She made the honor roll in her first full term as a resident of this house. She joined the school debate team and has, according to her coach, a natural aptitude for structured argument that suggests she may have been practicing it internally for years without an appropriate outlet. 1 week ago, in a quiet, private family courtroom, a judge reviewed the evidence: Trey's federal felony convictions, the documented pattern of gross parental negligence, the forensic financial picture of his household's instability, and the security footage Zoe had recorded, which served as exhibit evidence in both the fraud case and the guardianship proceeding, and stripped Trey of all parental rights. Permanently, without condition, and without the possibility of reinstatement. I stood next to Zoe in front of that judge, raised my right hand, and adopted her. The document in my office safe does not make me her guardian. It makes me her mother. It is the legal instrument that ensures Trey, Madison, and my parents cannot come near her under any circumstances, in any capacity, for any stated reason, not now, and not ever. Zoe kisses my cheek before she heads out to meet her driver. A brief, natural, uncalculated gesture of the kind that exists between people who are actually comfortable with each other. She grabs an apple from the ceramic bowl on the counter and is out the front door before I have finished watching her. I pour a fresh cup of dark roast and work through the small stack of personal mail my assistant left on the counter. Most of it is what it appears to be: glossy industry publications, formal event invitations, a card from a client whose crisis we resolved 6 months ago. Then I notice an envelope that does not belong. It is cheap and slightly wrinkled, the kind of envelope you buy in a drugstore in a pack of 50. There is no return address in the corner, but there does not need to be. I recognize the slanted, frantic cursive on the front immediately, the way you recognize handwriting from your childhood without having to think about it. It is from Susan. I slide my letter opener through the flap. Inside are 3 pages of lined notebook paper covered in smudged blue ink. A dense, rambling document that moves between genres without apparent awareness that it is doing so. It opens with a request for forgiveness. It transitions quickly into a detailed account of her physical suffering. The swelling in her legs from 8-hour shifts at the grocery store. The smell of diesel exhaust that comes through the walls of the trailer at night. The specific indignity of wearing a polyester uniform in front of people who do not care about her history. It describes Richard's transformation, the bitterness, the anger directed at the television, the way a man who once commanded rooms now fills a small space with resentment. She mentions, without particular emphasis, that Madison largely ignores her own infant, leaving Susan to provide primary care while Madison works minimum wage shifts elsewhere. Then she shifts registers again, into the territory she has always been most comfortable in, emotional leverage. She attempts to reconstruct a version of our shared childhood, a version in which we were a happy, intact family before Trey arrived and disrupted everything. A version that requires the selective omission of essentially everything that actually happened in that house. She says she misses her successful, brilliant daughter. She does not appear to register the distance between that characterization and the words she used 3 months ago in a cramped apartment over a glass of wine. Then she asks for a few $1,000s to help cover the cost of heating the trailer through the winter. I do not read the 3rd page. I carry the letter and its envelope out of the kitchen and into my home office. I switch on the heavy-duty commercial shredder beneath my desk, feed the pages in without pausing, and listen to the machine reduce Susan's carefully chosen words to confetti with the loud, efficient indifference of a device that has no context for what it is destroying and requires none. I switch the machine off. The silence returns. I brush my hands and check my watch. It is exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. A warm knock echoes from the front foyer. Not the sharp, entitled rap of someone who believes they have a right to be let in, but the relaxed, confident knock of someone who is invited and knows it. I smile, walking through the house toward the grand double doors. I have a party to host. This time, entirely on my own terms and for the right reasons. I swing the doors open wide. My event coordinator, a brilliant, unflappable woman who has executed dozens of corporate galas for my firm and has never once produced anything less than perfect wow, steps inside with the warm, genuine smile of someone who is genuinely pleased to be doing what she does. The estate is transformed, but the transformation looks nothing like what was planned 3 months ago. The brutal 95-degree heat has broken and been replaced by a crisp, perfect 72-degree autumn afternoon. The kind of day that feels like a deliberate editorial decision made by the weather on behalf of the occasion. The backyard is not staged to impress wealthy technology investors or to provide a luxurious backdrop for a fraudulent corporate acquisition announcement. It is arranged with the specific attention of someone who knows the difference between impressive and comfortable for authentic joy. There are no pretentious white tents. There are no towering crystal champagne pyramids or elaborate ice sculptures designed to photograph well from a distance. Instead, there are low, comfortable linen seating areas arranged in clusters around glowing stone fire pits. A live acoustic jazz trio plays at a conversational volume near the pool. A long, rustic wooden table is loaded with excellent local food, the kind of meal that does not require a carving station or a waiter in white gloves to be extraordinary. By noon, my actual family begins arriving through the front gates. I am not using the word loosely or metaphorically. I mean the people I have chosen, over years and sometimes at significant personal cost, to keep close. The people whose presence in my life has been defined by something more durable and more honest than the accident of shared genetics. My entire public relations staff walks through the gate laughing, carrying wine bottles, dressed for an afternoon rather than a performance. David, my attorney, the man who spoke calmly and precisely into an intercom speaker on a 95-degree Sunday afternoon and changed the course of everything that followed, arrives with his husband and hugs me the way people hug when they are genuinely glad to see each other. My closest friends, the ones who were present 15 years ago when my father drained my college fund and I had to figure out how to rebuild from zero, and who have been present for every significant development since are already settled on the patio, glasses in hand, talking over each other in the comfortable way of people who have been doing it for years. Near the outdoor kitchen, a group of 6 teenagers from Zoe's debate team have converged on a tray of artisan flatbreads with the focused, unself-conscious appetite of young people who are somewhere safe and know it. There is no tension in the autumn air. No whispered confrontations or carefully maintained silences or conversations happening in 2 registers simultaneously. No hidden agendas, no financial plots unfolding beneath the surface of the social occasion, no security cameras positioned to catch evidence of the next crisis. The energy is clean. It is light. It is, and I use this word with full awareness of how long I waited to be able to use it without irony, joyful. I step up to the edge of the raised stone patio and lift a crystal flute of vintage champagne. I tap the rim gently with a silver spoon, and the soft, clear ring carries through the conversation and the jazz and the laughter until the backyard quiets around it, and the people I have chosen to be here turn their faces toward me. I look out at them, 35 employees who are also, in the way that matters, friends. A handful of the people who have known me the longest and loved me the most honestly. And a group of teenagers who are here because one of them is mine. I raise my glass. I tell them that for a very long time, I was held prisoner by a lie I had been taught since childhood. The lie that blood relationships carry a moral weight that supersedes every other consideration, that sharing biological material with someone creates an obligation to endure whatever they do to you. That family is a category that exempts itself from the standards of basic decency and mutual respect by virtue of simply existing. I tell them that society weaponizes the word family, uses it specifically and strategically to pressure successful, independent people into setting themselves on fire to keep toxic relatives warm, into absorbing damage they would never accept from anyone else, into mistaking endurance for love. I pause. Then I tell them what I know now, standing on this patio in this particular autumn afternoon with these particular people around me. I tell them that blood only determines your starting line. It does not determine your destination. It does not determine who earns a permanent place at your table, or who gets to call themselves your family in any sense that actually means something. True family, I tell them, is not inherited. It is built. It is a daily, conscious, renewable decision to surround yourself with people who celebrate your success without jealousy, who respect your boundaries without requiring them to be enforced through crisis, who want good things for you, not because of what you can provide them, but because of who you actually are. I look at David and my staff and my friends and the teenagers eating flatbreads near the kitchen, and I thank them for their loyalty, for their honesty, for their presence across the years when the other version of family was taking what it could reach. I tell them that this property, this house that I paid for with a decade of work, that someone tried to steal and failed, that has been locked and empty and open and now full again, is no longer simply an asset or a fortress or a statement about what I have achieved. Because of the people standing on this lawn, it has finally become a home. The applause that follows is not polished or performative. It is the uneven, warm, slightly overlapping sound of people clapping because they mean it, and the distinction is immediately and completely audible. I lower my glass and let my eyes move across the lawn until I find Zoe. She is standing at the edge of the pool in the afternoon light, her head thrown back in unself-conscious, full-bodied laughter at something one of her classmates has just said. The sun is on her face. Her shoulders are completely relaxed. There is nothing in her expression, none of the watchfulness, none of the careful monitoring of her environment for the next thing she will need to navigate or absorb or survive, that I saw every time I was with her before. She is just a teenager, laughing, at a party, at her home. I bring the crystal flute to my lips and take a slow, deliberate sip. The champagne is cold and dry, and exactly right. The crisis has been managed. The record is clean. The people who tried to take what was mine are accountable to the choices they made, in ways that do not require my continued attention or emotional energy to maintain. And standing here on this patio, in the clean October air, surrounded by people I chose on purpose, I am, for the first time in my adult life, completely and entirely at peace. Rebecca's story is a reminder that protecting your peace is not a selfish act. It is an essential one. True family is defined by mutual respect, safety, and honest love, not by shared DNA or the obligation to absorb harm from people who happen to share your last name. You have the right to curate your inner circle. You have the right to walk away from exploitation,